Number 10. Dr. Murrow. The interesting thing too about Dr. Murrow is that some spelling for this character is like Dr. Morrow, but if you actually look at the comic itself, it's Murrow with a U, so I believe it's Murrow with a U, but if you say Morrow and I say Murrow, that's also fine. I'm not gonna come for you. Dr. Murrow appears in the What If issue number 11 from the 1997 series. Here we answer the question, what if the Marvel bullpen had been transformed into the Fantastic Four? Being from a different time period, there are definitely some extremely sexist tones in this issue. A lot of it aimed sadly at fabulous Flo Steinberg, who stands in for Invisible Woman. But another ridiculous aspect of this issue, aside from that more serious one, are some of the villains that we see the bullpen version of the FF face off against. Like their first villain, Dr. Murrow. Dr. Murrow's island was the one that they planned on visiting before they were delivered some fan mail. Upon opening it up, they found a mysterious radio-like device which transformed them into the Fantastic Four, granting them powers after they were exposed to cosmic rays that the device emitted. Turns out that this was all part of a Skrull plot, which we find out later in the issue, and that Dr. Murrow was also a victim of a similar device. Oh no. But even with that, why did he attack them when they got to his island? Why is he a villain in all this? Why is he one of the first villains we run into? Did the transformation like make him, I don't know, just really mad or something? Or violent? The reality is they probably just wanted to start the issue off with a good fight and a bit of mystery, but still Murrow ends up being a pretty bizarre villain because of this. Because there's things that just aren't explained here. Oh well, I'm willing to come along for this strange ride in any What If. Number 9. Disappointed Loki. In the What If story, What If the Hulk had the brain of Bruce Banner, we get to see what would happen if the Hulk had kept Banner's wits and then ran into Loki's illusion, you know, with the train tracks and such. Turns out this version of the Hulk was too smart to fall for Loki's trap. Seeing the TNT on the train tracks, but believing it to be an illusion, meant that he would never be put onto a collision course with the Avengers and therefore would never join that team. Instead, Loki ends up disappointed, and Banner goes on to fight against Galactus, joining with Professor X and Reed Richards to create the new and extremely powerful uni-being of X-Man. Poor Loki though, he's like, but I set this trap in. Alright. I guess not all traps are winners. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to show some support for us on other platforms, head on over to Facebook, give us a like, give us a follow, it does help us out, and we're gonna have lots of exciting new content coming for you over there. Exciting. Number 8. Fake Captain America. Both weird and great in a lot of ways. Fake Captain America was William Burnside. Now, while William Burnside does exist in the 616 universe, where he was a well-meaning Captain America imposter driven mad by improper use of the super soldier serum, in the What If reality of Earth 84444, he ended up becoming obsessed with communists, paranoid that they could be lurking around every corner, which is kind of what happened in the main continuity, but in this one, he's less like, oh no, it's just the super soldier serum, and more like he made some conscious choices here. Modeling America into less of a democracy under the name of Captain America, Burnside would be beaten back by the real Captain America, who in this story doesn't resurface until 1984, which means that Burnside has a lot of time to basically do harm to the American image and the influence of the nation's people. This warning story and the speech the real Cap gives at the end are both still pretty relevant today, which is why this is like a great issue, but also why it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird how there's a lot of stuff in this that I feel like is still relevant, even though it's from 1984. Do we ever do new things, or does history just cycle in like some vicious loop? Probably that. Number 7. Maggie Nito. Maggie Nito appears in a humor issue of What If. She's the one who terrorized this poor old styrofoam skeleton Wolverine. She's technically supposed to be the female child version of Magneto, who is known in the comics for ripping the adamantium out of Wolverine over the course of a few horrifying panels of comics. Maggie Nito, on the other hand, doesn't need any powers to hurt her version of Wolverine, who is much more cowardly in comparison to his main continuity counterpart. Which, I mean, makes sense, considering he literally has a styrofoam skeleton. I mean, I would be afraid of Maggie Nito too, if I had a styrofoam skeleton. Also, just in general, she seems like a mean little girl.
Danger. This villain is definitely a weird one. It's basically just the humanoid form of the Danger Room, a highly sophisticated computer interface that the X-Men used to train. But in 2009's astonishing X-Men number 9, the Danger Room comes to life and takes on a humanoid form that calls itself Danger. Although I know this isn't a what if issue, in 2010's What If Astonishing X-Men #1, Danger gets a more focused storyline and it's even weirder than you might expect. Basically, Ultron somehow catches wind that Danger has come to life and falls in love with her. They become a couple and go on a murder spree, killing all the X-Men and then eventually Professor X himself. Then they take to the cosmos and continue to kill all the organic life forms in their path, until they finally establish their own intergalactic empire. It's later pondered by the Watcher that if Professor X had only listened to Danger when she declared that she had gained sentience, she wouldn't have been so inclined to take him down. It's sort of a cool message about the dangers of AI, but first and foremost, it's just a weird antagonist in this what if issue. The Danger Room gets married to Ultron. It doesn't get much weirder than that, I don't think.
Number 5. Thanos. Another one of my favorites has to come from the What If Disney Plus streaming show, where we actually got to see what Thanos would be like if he were on the side of good. So technically here, I guess he's a hero, but of course in the main continuity we know him better as a villain, both in the comics and the MCU, so yeah. Thanos ends up joining the Ravagers and becoming a close ally of Star-Lord in episode 2 of the show, where we get to explore what the world would be like if T'Challa, instead of Peter Quill, ended up as Star-Lord. And guess what? Turns out the world would potentially be a lot better for it, minus the imminent doom of the universe as a result of Ego's plot to kind of like take it over, but ignoring that. Other than that, it was doing pretty well for itself, I gotta say. Thanos didn't even snap half the universe out of existence in this reality, and all because T'Challa convinced him not to do so by simply talking him down. Man, where was Black Panther when that was happening before? Why didn't he just come in and be like, hey, look, Thanos, no. Maybe he's gotta travel in space before he can have those conversational skills, maybe that's why?
At number 4 is Cable. So in this 2-part what if issue, Cable is the bad guy and he actually kills his parents, Cyclops and Jean Grey, as well as Professor X. Professor X seems to be getting a lot of heat on this list. And even though this is a what if and basically anything goes, it's just a really bizarre call to have part of the X-Men family travel through time to kill his parents and their noble mentor Charles Xavier. This naturally doesn't go unnoticed and actually starts an all-out war between the X-Men and the X-Force. And while these two groups are duking it out, Magneto takes the opportunity to take control of Washington, D.C., which segues into that second part I mentioned, aptly named What If Magneto Took Over the USA. But regardless, this just made me feel weird to see a character we're used to seeing as a hero just take a sudden turn to evil, so much to the point where he kills his own flesh and blood in a brutal massacre. And why? Well, they have some differences in ideology, but why does that matter if they're in the past? Couldn't Cable have just stayed in his own time and believed in stuff over there? Although he's not really known to stay in his own time very often. It's just that he normally does it for good instead of doing it to start a massive war that ends in Sentinels dropping nukes on Washington and killing everyone. I don't know, was it worth it, Cable? Check out the issue and see if you think.
Number 3. Elektra. Elektra makes an appearance in the 1977 What If series in issue number 34. This being a humor issue, we get to take a look at what might have happened had Elektra survived her run-in with Bullseye. Even though Elektra at this time was depicted as a villain, or, you know, at least an extremely edgy anti-hero, it seems that this one-panel take on the character has her reconsider her life of crime as a result of her near-death experience. This is pretty weird, considering I'm pretty sure at this point Elektra would have had already a few near-death experiences in her line of work as an assassin. So, like, unless she knew she was going to die here and then that's not what happened, but I feel like for her this is just an average Tuesday. Elektra even goes so far as to consider settling down and getting married, and I quote, or something. What is or something? Also, Elektra getting married just because she didn't die from Bullseye fighting her? Wow, that just seems a little unbelievable. Anything can happen in an alternate reality.
Number 2 is Dazzler. In What If number 33, the question is asked, what if Dazzler had become the Herald of Galactus? These days, Dazzler is known to be a relatively stagnant member of the X-Men and doesn't usually get a lot of mention in the mainstream. Sorry, Amanda. Amanda really likes Dazzler. However, in the 80s, it was a totally different story. Right before this issue of What If in 1981, Dazzler is taken on by Galactus as his herald, but only to complete a quick mission to retrieve his original herald. Then she goes back home. But fast forward 1 year later to 1982, And in this what if, the situation is revisited again, but in this case, she stays as this Herald and actually becomes one of the most powerful villains in all the cosmos. The Herald of Galactus is an individual imbued with part of Galactus's power cosmic, and their job is to fly around the cosmos and look for planets for Galactus to consume. So it's a pretty big deal to be given the title of Herald, both for the one who's selected and for the people of the cosmos, because if you're doing your job right as a Herald, you'd best believe you're ruining and ending the lives of countless others. So, for Dazzler, of all the heroes to be taken in by Galactus and given this responsibility, it just leaves me with a weird feeling in my gut. Like, why would a character that barely wants to be a hero and only really wants to sing, like why would they take on the job of Herald of Galactus? The answer does lie in this issue, but it's still a bit confusing and maybe a bit out of character for Dazzler, which is why I put it at number 2.
Number 1. Susie Richards. In issue number 30 of the 1989 What If series, Susie, Reed and Sue's second child, becomes the villain. Susie is obviously meant to be a stand-in for Valeria Richards, who we have now, their daughter, who has a weird history where she was kind of both the oldest and then like the youngest child of the fantastic duo. It's confusing, but don't worry about it. In this version of the story, she is most definitely just the younger, but despite being the younger sibling between her and Franklin, she still terrifies her brother, who in the main continuity was once known for insanely powerful reality warping abilities. Although I don't think he has those in this reality. But anyways, you know you're scary when you're scaring Franklin. Even a young Franklin. Susie is an evil little girl who it turns out was possessed by a hellspawn that came from the negative zone. In the end, Franklin is forced to fight and defeat her, but unfortunately all too late, as the rest of his family has already been killed by her. Even Dr. Doom doesn't stand a chance against the possessed Susie. Poor Franklin, he warned everyone, but they didn't listen.
Leapfrog. This spring-loaded villain appears in the What If that has Aunt May gaining Spider-Man's powers instead of Peter Parker. And before you jump down my throat, Leapfrog does appear in other comics first, I know this, actually first showing up in Daredevil number 25, but this iteration of the character is clearly meant to be more slapstick and ridiculous than he normally is, which is saying a lot, considering this must be one of the silliest villains in Marvel. But case in point, his first appearance in this What If issue shows him crashing through a brick wall and just swearing at everybody, screaming expletives as he bounces past a group of civilians and a news reporter. He ends up in a battle with Aunt May's Spider-Woman and gets thwarted by nothing other than a stretchy mass of dough that Aunt May uses to lasso him into a tree. He's just clearly such a dumb villain and appears for what I could only imagine was comedic value to the already hysterical What If issue.
Number 9. Ghost Grandpa. While technically Ghost Riders are supposed to be heroes, this one doesn't seem to be too nice in terms of the brief glimpse that we see of him. And it's because of that I decided to include him as a kind of like a low-key villain. Ghost Grandpa makes his appearance in the 1977 What If series in issue number 34, where we ask the question, what if Ghost Rider had possessed someone else? Instead of Johnny Blaze, of course. The answer allows us to take a look at a few different candidates, including Ghost Skater and Ghost Baby, but while both talk about punishing evildoers and getting vengeance, Ghost Grandpa only seems to be interested in getting revenge on his nurse for delaying his glass of warm milk.
Number 8 is Wolverine, Lord of Vampires. This villain is bizarre because it's the embodiment of a character we've all known forever, but who doesn't really exhibit any of his typical traits. In What If number 24, Wolverine takes on the Lord of Vampires, who tries to bite him to turn Wolverine into a vampire himself. And since Wolverine was too badass to simply be turned into a vampire, he decides it's only in his character to kill the guy. And he does, but what happens when you kill the Lord of Vampires is that you take on the title yourself. And this is when Wolverine starts to change into a very strange version of himself. Right away, Wolverine starts turning his former friends into vampires, with his demeanor totally shifting as he uses like mind control powers on them, which is just pretty strange on its own. Honestly, this is what it is. It's just weird seeing Wolverine without any level of humanity in him anymore. Something about this transformation doesn't seem right and gives me some very conflicting feelings towards the whole thing. Although I gotta say, he does turn out to be pretty powerful Lord of Vampires. He even takes out Doctor Strange in a harrowing battle, which says a lot for Wolverine on its own. This suggests that his power level is pretty heavily increased after getting the title of Lord of Vampires. Doesn't change the pop collar and bat-eared hairdo though. This is a list about weird villains, not powerful ones. Although he might end up on both, he still ranks on this one for sure. I mean, just look at him. At number 7, we have Grasshopper. This guy is known as a bit of a loser in the comics, having been killed off a handful of times in pretty embarrassing ways. But despite this, and despite the fact that he's based on a much less cool insect than Spider-Man, I think he has some potential. Even if he's kept as a sort of B character, I think he could fit into the MCU in some weird way. I think his costume isn't badly designed, and well, that's kind of it. I think he could do for a modernization upgrade, but maybe one of the Marvel heroes' out of touch parents could take on the mantle for a bit, or an annoying older brother or something like that. He only joins the Great Lakes Avengers in the comics, so maybe in the future an MCU version of the Young Avengers could come across the GLA and we can catch a glimpse of Grasshopper. At number 6, we have Glob Herman. With hints at mutants appearing in Phase 5 of the MCU, we may be able to see some X-Men in the MCU pretty soon. Now, I don't think they'll be rushing to get Glob Herman on the big screen before Wolverine or Magneto, let's say, but there's a chance that if they really dive into the X-Men storylines and characters, we can expect to see a whole slew of new characters, and maybe Glob Herman will make a cameo. Glob has a thick layer of wax instead of skin, which is transparent and allows you to see his skeleton and organs moving around in there. But he isn't entirely useless and is actually known to be relatively important as a character in the comics. He can light himself on fire and fling hot flaming wax at his enemies, which isn't an awful power set, but it's also pretty bad. At number 5 is Doorman. Okay, this is another one like Grasshopper that I genuinely think could have a chance at making an appearance in the MCU. Aside from his god-awful name and reputation as a pretty ridiculous hero, I think his power set and aesthetic are pretty dang cool. And no, he isn't super good at holding the door for people. He's actually got the ability to create portals as well as making himself totally intangible. And that pairing of powers actually matches up to being a pretty powerful combination. And tied in with his cool black and white color scheme, I honestly think that this guy can make an appearance in the MCU outside of a meme-like context. In the comics, he sacrifices himself to take down Maelstrom, but is revived as the Angel of Death, at which point he gets a major power boost. So perhaps this iteration as the Angel of Death could make an appearance, hinting at the backstory of having been Doorman in a previous life. At number 4 is Squirrel Girl. Probably the most competent member of the Great Lakes Avengers, Squirrel Girl actually has a decent chance to appear in some iteration in a future MCU project. At first glance, she seems like a pretty silly character sporting a big furry squirrel tail and ears, but she actually has a pretty decent power set on top of it, including super strength, night vision, a healing factor, and superhuman leaping. She's also adept with computers and communications, so even if we don't see her on the battlefield, it's possible she appears in the control room of some SHIELD operation at some point. I don't know, Squirrel Girl is a cult favorite, and out of all the weird characters on this list, she's probably one of the most respected out of all of them. At number 3, we have Howard the Duck. We all know that back in 2014, Marvel gifted viewers with one of the best memes of the year with a fake post-credits sequence suggesting that there'd be a Howard movie coming out in the MCU. Of course, this was just a poke at how silly the idea would be, and I agree. I just think that now, with all the fan service that has been done over the last few years, it's possible that we get to see this little dude again at some point. All joking aside though, Howard the Duck has appeared in so many Marvel events in the comics at one point or another that his wiki is actually up there with one of the longer reads out of any hero I've read. From the Fear Itself storyline to Original Sin, Marvel Comics often takes any interdimensional event as an excuse to bring back Howard for a laugh. So why wouldn't they continue to do so in the MCU? I bet the Guardians of the Galaxy post-credits scene wasn't the last we'll see of this very serious detective. And the 1986 feature film with a 14% on Rotten Tomatoes does not count. At number 2, we have Marrow. A former member of the X-Men, Marrow is another example of a sort of weird character that we can imagine being featured in one way or another in an upcoming MCU project. Definitely not in this phase, since they haven't yet included X-Men in their rollouts as of yet, but maybe in Phase 5 they'll dig deep and feature some more niche X-Men like Marrow. Her powers are basically that she can grow her bones on command. Well, at first it isn't on command really, she is actually known at first to have very little control of her powers, leaving her overtaken weakened by the extreme growth of bone matter from within her body, which is sort of gross and terrifying, but perhaps that could be used in a cool way for the MCU. Maybe Marrow is facing challenges controlling her powers throughout one of the movies, and only when Professor X helps her hone them does she come through as a Deus Ex Machina at the end of one of the movies. I don't know, something like that. She's not even that weird, honestly. I just genuinely think I'd like to see her in an MCU project. At number 1, we have the one and only, my all-time favorite, 3D Man. If you've watched my other Weird Heroes lists, you'll know by now that I'm a huge fan of 3D Man. Is that ironic? Is it a serious claim? You can't tell. Well, honestly, it's a bit of both. Primarily, I just love the idea of a hero that's 3D themed with absolutely no relationship to anything 3D whatsoever. Something about the character being stuck in the early 2000s when 3D had hit another golden age, sporting a green and red suit and the whole thing, something about that just makes me laugh. So that's the ironic side, but honestly, I think this character could be explored further. Delroy Garrett Jr. grew up as a track and field star, competing in the Olympics and the whole 9 yards, no pun intended. But I feel like there hasn't been a hero that's, before anything else, an athlete. Unless you count Spider-Girl. I guess Spider-Girl was an athlete in school, but she hasn't been in the MCU. But I just feel like this could be a cool opportunity for Marvel to offer more representation to the athletics community. That, and how 3D Man's whole vibe is lost in time, and it would be so cool and maybe a bit refreshing to revisit that retro early 2000s era at some point on the big or small screen.
Number 10, T'Challa Star-Lord. Have you ever seen the MCU's What If animated series? It is honestly really fun, and it has a great art style as well. But just like in the comics, it's the fun, possible scenarios of what if that are the star. One of the better, if not weirder, episodes revolves around a universe where instead of Peter Quill, it was Prince T'Challa of Wakanda who was abducted by the Ravagers all the way back in the day. T'Challa, as the new Star-Lord, convinced the Ravagers to become a Robin Hood-like group who steal from the rich and give to the less fortunate. Under his leadership, they became icons and they saved a lot of people, recruited and persuaded lots of heroes and villains to join the Ravagers, one of which even being Thanos. T'Challa heard of the orb on Morag, the one from the beginning of Guardians of the Galaxy, and he goes to retrieve it, being stopped by Korath the Pursuer, just like Peter was. But unlike Peter though, Korath actually recognized T'Challa as Star-Lord and he joined up as well. He saved Peter Quill from Ego, saved Drax's family, got Nebula and Thanos to reconnect, and even stole a device from the Collector that could terraform ecosystems and save entire planets from starvation caused by overpopulation. That thing Thanos was trying to fix in the Avengers movies. He eventually joins the Guardians of the Multiverse to fight the insanely powered Ultron. It's pretty great. Number 9, Miles Morales becomes Wolverine. In this What If, we don't really get an explanation as to why, but instead of being his normal self, Miles Morales in this world is instead a mutant with the same abilities as Wolverine, and when he is younger, he is abducted alongside other children by Weapon X, who turn him into the adamantium skeleton super weapon just like the alternate Wolverine, because of course that's what happens. Fast forward a few years though. Now in this world, Sentinels are being used to hunt down mutants by S.H.I.E.L.D. And after Miles takes out like 3 of them, S.H.I.E.L.D. sends this super cool looking warrior wielding an adamantium katana to take him out. This awesome S.H.I.E.L.D. warrior turns out to be Miles' father, and once he discovers this Wolverine mutant is his son, he turns on S.H.I.E.L.D. So, obviously they send another assassin, Miles' uncle Aaron, who seems to be doomed to be bad no matter what because, you know, that's just how it goes. He is this world's version of Sabretooth. Miles' father defends his son to his dying breath until Miles jumps in to beat Sabretooth to a pulp and almost ends him too before his father convinces him to stop and to instead be a hero. And then the X-Men show up to recruit Miles, led by a professor who is Genki Lee, the original Miles' best friend for some reason. Yeah, I don't know, but this story is wild. You should check it out. Number 8, Wolverunisher. On the topic of Wolverine, what about the What If where Wolverine became a kind of Punisher? In this story, we were in 1920s Canada, following a Wolverine who doesn't seem to actually have claws, or if he does, he barely uses them. He does seem to have his healing factor and senses though. Whatever his powers are, he is still himself because we find out he has had a son with a lady who works at a bar. He is forced to take responsibility for them and makes friends with the barkeep, but that all comes to an end when they are all brought to an end thanks to a fire caused by a man named Scarface, who fled to Chicago. Obviously, Logan isn't going to let that go. He tracks down the villain villain, and with the help of one Matteo de Priglia, and all while wearing a skull and crossbones flag on his chest and wielding firearms, and basically never popping his claws, he actually takes his revenge on Scarface, and it's great. I mean, he looks totally amazing in this story, but it's also an incredibly weird twist on a version of Punisher and a version of Wolverine. Also, it's a little more disappointing than I expected it to be. Number 7. Eye-Boy. Not the first or last mutant to be called the lamest mutant ever, Trevor Hawkins developed his mutant ability after the Avengers vs. X-Men war in Wolverine and the X-Men number 19 in 2012. And well, his mutation is that Trevor is covered from head to toe in dozens of eyes. It's creepy, it's weird, it's actually more useful than you might think. Microscopic, telescopic, X-ray, night, infrared, and thermal vision are all things he is capable of. He can also detect chemicals, is an excellent marksman, and is skilled in nonverbal communication. He can basically read other people's behaviors and body language to almost read their minds, predict attacks, and read people's histories. All Sherlock Holmes-like. He can pinpoint weak spots in machines and people, is able to see past illusions and disguises, but to top it all off, the craziest and newest addition to his powers is solar blasts, meaning Trevor can emit intense bursts of bright yellow energy and focused beams of extrastellar force that cause sunburns and radiation poisoning. So yeah, Eye-Boy looks really weird, sure, but he'll tell you your deepest insecurities and then blast you with radiation, so there's that.
At number 6 is Quire. Quire, aka Irina Clayton, wasn't ever part of the X-Men, but studied at the School for Gifted Children, which I'm gonna count, for the simple reason that I wanted to talk about her. First appearing in the new X-Men issue number 119, Quire just has mouths all over her body, and the function for it is very unclear. In some cases, she's able to confuse her enemies by shouting things in all directions, but that's about it as far as I can tell. And I'm honestly not leaving anything out, that's really it. It's unfortunate because in these cases, the use of the word mutant becomes that much more accurate. Like, Quire is one of those X-Men that I feel badly for. Superpowers are supposed to be cool and make us wish that we could have them too, but this one is just, it's like a curse, you know what I mean? But honestly, that sort of goes for everyone on this list, and at least Quire seems like a competent and friendly person. So don't get me wrong, she could still have potential. Power doesn't always come from brute force, you know, it can also be achieved by becoming a good strategist or tactician, which she'll have plenty of mouths to yell orders at people, I'm sure. At least.
Number 5. Fabio Medina. Although he had thought himself and his powers ridiculous, which they kind of are, if we're being honest, Fabio Medina and his battle cry, "Gold balls!" is kind of awesome actually. Fabio can produce golden balls of different sizes that shoot out from any part of his body and make the sound poink each time they hit something. The golden balls he fires actually seem to bounce. Now, ask me why this is a useful genetic mutation. Go ahead, ask away. But prepare yourself because he gets more weird. After he moved to Krakoa with other mutants, it was discovered that Goldball's balls are actually infertile eggs. And if these eggs are made fertile, it could allow for unlimited resurrection of the mutant race. Yes. So, the golden balls he was firing out of his body at sentinels and antagonists were actually infertile bouncy golden eggs. I don't like this. But he did become a member of the Five that combined their powers to resurrect deceased mutants, and that was pretty cool.
At number 4 is Beak. Beak, or Barnell Bowhusk, is a creation of Grant Morrison, first appearing in his new X-Men series, and he is basically a bird person, but in a more literal sense than any of us asked for. He's got hollow bones, feathers, and a beak, and he can't even fly really, he can just glide briefly, which in my opinion just, it's not worth the hassle of the rest of what he's got going on. He does have talons and long range vision, so there's some kind of offensive potential there, and apparently he's really nice too, which I guess makes up for the fear he strikes in the hearts of many. I like to imagine that Beak was created accidentally when Grant Morrison pitched a character that was half bird, half human, thinking he was on the phone with his character designer, but he'd actually called David Cronenberg instead. Poor Barnell Bowhusk, I feel badly for him, honestly. Even his real name, Barnell Bowhusk? Anyway.
Number 3. Dupe. If you have not heard of Dupe, well then allow me to enlighten you. This weird looking bumpy green bean thing will put his hand on your chest. The product of a Cold War US military experiment instrumental in the fall of the Soviet Union. somehow. Dupe is unable to learn English, and as such he speaks in a language all of his own that everyone somehow can eventually understand. Although Captain America says the US government created him in a secret weapons project, he is also apparently from a place called Marginalia. It's surprising that he is a member of the X-Men considering he isn't technically a mutant, as far as I know at least. But the most surprising thing is his list of powers. He has possible omniscience, he's strong and durable enough to do battle with and defeat Thor, he can heal from super serious wounds in seconds and resurrect himself, he is crazy fast, he has size alteration, energy projection, psionic abilities, he can perform dupish magic, and has the power of the funk. And last but not least, Dupe's body contains a nightmare dimension known as Dupe Land that he can trap people in and summon monsters from. And if you want to count it, he even has the power of looking like a really angry mix between a lima bean and a pickle. So there's that.
At number 2 is Ugly John. He's not technically part of the X-Men, okay? But he's a mutant who's been on their side for his whole run in the comics. And honestly, I just wanted to include the weirdest Marvel character I've ever heard of. He's got 3 faces. And that's it. He doesn't last for long, first appearing in New X-Men issue number 114, when he's saved by Wolverine and Cyclops from a Sentinel who captures him. After being saved from captivity, he's then probably captured again by the Wild Sentinels and is critically injured in this incident. I don't know why Ugly John is such an asset to the Sentinels, but I imagine it really tested the whole no man left behind philosophy for the X-Men. He really puts the other X-Men in some serious danger as they save him for a second time, this time with his life threatened by injury. And unfortunately for Ugly John, he's so badly injured that Cyclops actually puts him out of his misery. I know. It's very dark, but don't blame me, blame Grant Morrison. I just wish the world had at least given this 3-faced mutant a break by allowing him a nicer name.
Number 1. Bailey Hoskins. How does this normal looking ginger wind up as the number 1 spot on our list? Bailey Hoskins from Earth TRN 656, otherwise known as Exceptional, was from the non-ironically titled X-Men Worst X-Men Ever 5-issue story from 2016. Now what are his powers? Bailey has the greatest power of self-detonation. He can blow up! Just once. And then he moves on to the eternal plane of death. So how do we find out about his mutant ability if he can't really use it? Well, his parents are both mutants. His mother has X-ray vision and his dad can quote-unquote fry an egg on his chest if he wanted to. Cool. They visit the Xavier Institute where Beast breaks this poor potential X-Man's young heart by letting him know his utterly depressing power. Not too long after that, when deciding to walk away from the school for mutants, his parents, the only thing he says he has left, gets stepped on by a Sentinel. He joins the school and basically fails at everything he tries to do, using a mech armor, being an intern, joining the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and the world eventually becomes an apocalypse ruled by a fellow mutant, Riches. In the end, fueled by the fact that he has been a failure his entire life, Bailey finally uses his power to bring down Riches and finally do something actually exceptional.
Number 10. Yondu. The Ravager Yondu that we know from the MCU, where he's played by Michael Rooker, is quite different from the one we know in the comics. Here, Yondu Udonta, the original Yondu anyways, was a native centurion of Centauri 4. He didn't have any powers, but did have his Yaka arrows and his bow. Yeah, in the comics he actually uses a bow to shoot them. Yaka arrows, like in the MCU, are unique in that they can change direction after fired, but only by those native to Centauri 4, who know how to basically use high-pitched whistles to direct and manipulate them once those arrows are fired. Similar to what we see in the MCU with Yondu, but, you know, a little bit different. Yondu on Earth 691 was one of the original members of the Guardians of the Galaxy, joining the team to fight back against the galactic oppression of the Badoon. Once that had been settled, Yondu basically traveled the galaxy with the Guardians, going on all sorts of adventures before retiring and settling down on Centauri 4. In the end, he would be called upon to travel back in time to prevent the ancestor he was named after from making a grave mistake. He became quite close to his ancestor, who of course is also named Yondu. Present Yondu also recklessly fought to protect his ancestor, dying in the process, but also oddly enough inspiring ancestor Yondu to become the historical hero that he was destined to be, and that inspired the naming of present Yondu. It's timey-wimey stuff. Number 9. Star Fox. Star Fox is cosmic, so I guess it kinda makes a little bit of sense when it comes to him joining the Guardians team, but he's also often more associated with the Avengers, or you know, with Thanos. Star Fox, or Eros, is the brother of Thanos, who is also technically an Eternal. Yeah, weirdly he's attached to a lot of different groups. groups, actually. Both Eros and Thanos are technically part of the group of Eternals that are from Titan. You see, in the cosmos, Earth wasn't the only place where the Celestials manipulated native beings to create their own sub-race of beings known as the Eternals, which by the way is how it all goes down in the comics, although in the movies Eternals are more like kinda like robots, I guess, that were made by Celestials out in space and were simply brought to Earth to monitor, aid, and eventually harvest that planet. Star Fox joins the Dark Guardians team, actually founding it to stop Thanos from being resurrected after he's died. Initially this meant they actually had to hunt down Guardian of the Galaxy member Gamora, who they believed would be used in the resurrection ritual to bring Thanos back. However, it turned out that it was Star Fox that was wanted for that ritual, not Gamora, prompting Gamora to kill her adopted uncle as she too wanted to prevent Thanos' return. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to show us some love on another platform, head on over to Facebook where you can give us a like and a follow. Thanks. Number 8. Groot. Groot is definitely one of the weirdest characters like on paper when it comes to the Guardians. He is a sentient alien tree who is known to only speak the words "I am Groot," though often with various different meanings of course behind those 3 words. In the comics, Groot is from Planet X, where there exist other Flora Colossi like him. However, Groot here was known for being an outcast who cared more about the maintenance mammals of that planet than his own tree brethren. As a result of choosing the maintenance mammals over the other Flora Colossi, Groot was exiled from his planet and so set out to explore space, eventually joining the Guardians of the Galaxy. In the first, now retcon comic book appearance of Groot, he was actually a villain, although Tales to Astonish issue number 13 is no longer considered his first appearance. It's been established that the Groot that actually appears there was, I guess, also named Groot, but like another Flora Colossi, so yeah. But initially that's what he was. He was a monster from Planet X. Oh no. It's okay, he's not a monster. We love Groot, right?
Number 7. Earth 17 Superman. On Earth 17, superheroes are a product of government experiments. The Superman of this universe, Overman, was the first, with the other superheroes being spawns of his DNA. Now that may be weird, but that ain't the weird part. He also doesn't really seem like a villain yet, does he? Well, after contracting a disease, you know, contracting a disease from another person, yes, like that kind of disease, he goes insane and destroys the Justice League and reduces his world to rubble. He then gets his filthy paws on a doomsday boom boom that he intends to use on Earth 17 and wipe it out. The Crisis on Infinite Earths destroyed this reality, just like DC tried to destroy such a naughty Superman story, even having different iterations of Overmans who were different, like an Overman who became allied with the Axis powers in World War II. But the internet never forgets DC Comics, and people like me exist to remind everyone of the things you published into this world. I am sorry, sort of. Thanks for the content. Number 6. Mr. Mxyzptlk. Look, I talked about Batmite when discussing heroes, and he wasn't even really a hero, so how can I not mention the first 5th dimensional imp in this video? Plus he's got a fun name. Mr. Mxyzptlk is a reality warping imp obsessed with Superman, who, just like his rival Batmite did with Batman, simply seeks to annoy the hell out of Superman and just prove he is smarter than him. Which is good, because he has a level of power that in other hands could cause the entire end of the multiverse. More on that later though. He can do almost anything imaginable if he wishes it. And his only weakness really is being convinced or tricked into saying his name backwards to send him back to the 5th dimension, which, if you're trying to say it correctly, is honestly a superpower in and of itself. Clitopizixum. I got it. Number 5. Emperor Joker. Mr. Mxyzptlk has an extreme level of power, like I said. Also, like I said, if this power fell into the wrong hands, it could be potentially reality ending. Now, what hands could be worse than the psychotic hands of Batman's arch nemesis, the Joker? Well, that's exactly who gets the power in the Emperor Joker storyline. Mr. Mix gets bored and wants to give Joker 1% of his power, just to see the tricks Joker is able to pull off. But instead, the Joker tricks Mr. Mxyzptlk into giving him 99.9% of his power instead. Joker uses this power to rewrite all of reality to become his sick, twisted dream world. He eats the whole population of China out of a Chinese food container box. He keeps everyone stuck in a time loop, including Batman, who he introduces to the afterlife over and over every day forever. Oh, and he also turned Flash into a slow-moving Abyss Man. Superman, the Spectre and Mr. Mxyzptlk, being the only ones who can remember the former world, try to do something about this all-powerful Joker. But that's just the problem. He is all-powerful. He destroys all of reality, but he can't bring himself to destroy Batman fully. And because of this, he loses control of his power, allowing the Spectre and Mr. Mix to steal it back and fix all of reality. This story it's pretty nuts. Number 4, Condiment King. When the villainous Condiment King came on the scene, it was literally on the scene, as he appeared in the animated Batman TV show from 1992. One of the best, honestly. Condiment King was Buddy Stantler, a comedian who was brainwashed by the Joker into becoming a villain who wields condiment squirters and viciously horrible puns. I knew you'd catch up to me sooner or later. How I've relished this meeting. Come, Batman, let's see if you can cut the mustard. Diabolical stuff like that. The puns get even worse in the comics, with his real name becoming a pun on its own. Mitchell Mayo. He isn't taken seriously by anyone. His weapons don't actually project his condiments at a speed fast enough to do anyone harm, but they sure are inconvenient, leaving nasty stains in your superhero costume. On the other hand, he does potentially have the ability to be able to cause anaphylactic shock if he is battling someone with an allergy, right? Number 3, Monsieur Mallah and the Brain. Monsieur Mallah is described in his wiki as a militant, super intelligent French gorilla. The Brain, on the other hand, is described as a genius French scientist and master criminal who exists as a disembodied brain. So, those two descriptions are interesting enough on their own, but when I tell you the French militant gorilla and the disembodied brain are an item together, I think that just elevates the whole thing to a different level. Together, they are the primary leaders of the Brotherhood of Evil, who were villains to both the Doom Patrol and the Teen Titans. They both appeared in Doom Patrol 86 in 1964. Now, Brain was once a scientist who experimented on the gorilla who would become Mallah, which would increase Mallah's intelligence. An accident injured Ernst, and Mallah had to remove Ernst's brain and place it in a technological holding thingamajig to keep him alive and be able to communicate. The two are almost always together, with Mallah carrying around the brain. Hey, look, I don't judge. You find love where you find love, but as a concept for supervillains who lead a team of supervillains, you gotta admit it's pretty odd to say the least. Number 2, Animal, Vegetable, Mineral Man. Let me repeat that for all those in the back who may not have heard. Animal, Vegetable, Mineral, Man. I don't really have a problem with 2/3 of that. I just get really hung up on the vegetable part. Is that weird? Sven Larsson is the man who claims that title. And while it is a completely ridiculous one, it is actually pretty fitting. Sven fell victim to an experiment of his own making, which allows him to transform into any animal, vegetable, or mineral, either partially or fully, although he very obviously likes to do a bit of all three at the same time, which is an odd choice, but hey, I just work here. Animal, Vegetable, Mineral Man first appeared in Doom Patrol 89 in August 1964, and he is an enemy to the team, which makes sense given their weirdness. But Animal, Vegetable, Mineral Man here has a vendetta against the Doom Patrol's leader, the Chief, who he believed once stole an invention of his. An invention that, funnily enough, is the only way of stopping Animal, Vegetable, Mineral Man. But he didn't even do that, so I don't know. Look, it gets weirder and weirder, but I gotta move on. Before I do though, Animal, Vegetable, Mineral Man. Okay, sorry, I just wanted to get out of my system one more time. Number 1, Mr. Mind. I think anyone who hasn't heard of this villain before would be forgiven. When you think of the most fearsome villains, specifically the villains of Captain Marvel, otherwise known as Shazam, you may not first think about the 7-inch long sentient worm from Venus known as Mr. Mind. This diabolically evil mind-controlling worm, after the events of Infinite Crisis, would cocoon himself and then emerge as a massive monstrosity capable of manipulating reality, consuming universes, and traveling through time and space. He was described as eating years and events from this universe's history, altering the Earth with every flap of his wings. It took a combined effort from Booster Gold, Supernova, and Skeets to defeat Mr. Mind by trapping him inside Skeets' shell, which was fortified by the Suspendium. Then, Booster Gold threw Skeets through time with the help of Supernova to the day he was first discovered on Earth by Dr. Sivana, and then he is trapped in a time loop forever. So they didn't even actually end up ending him. They just trapped him, this all-powerful mind-controlling 7-inch long worm. Number 10. Gorgon. If you remember the weirdest DC Multiverse Superheroes video, which you should check out, I talked about a pastiche of the Incredible Hulk in DC Comics called Big Baby from Earth 8. He was part of a team called the Retaliators, who were supposed to be a joke version of the Avengers. This universe also had a team of villains called the Extremists, and on that team was a Dr. Octopus type character named Gorgon. While Gorgon did utilize technological enhancements, I think his octopus likeness comes in the form of his prehensile hair. The hair tentacles he uses and his role as a scientist mixed with his weight and oddly familiar glasses all come together to really evoke a Dr. Octopus likeness, which is just weird enough to make me double take. He is also familiar enough that I can't really put him any higher on this list, so there's that. Number 9. Dex Star. Or Dexstar, or Dexter, or Dexstar, Dexstar. Cats can be ruthless, cold, and scary at times, I'll admit that. But while the Red Lantern of Sector 2814, Dexstar, is an irrationally rage-filled kitty, it's all because he loved his owner. Dexstar's origin shows the cat Dexter with his owner when she is attacked by robbers who broke into her home. While Dexter tried his best to scratch the attacker, he ended up ending the life of Dexter's owner. When the police showed up on the scene, Dexter was kicked out into the streets so as to not contaminate the scene. Now, 2 rascals from the streets found Dexter when he was trying to sleep, put him in a sack, and threw him into a river. Now that is one hell of a sequence of events, and all this happening filled the poor little kitty with enough rage that it caught the attention of Atrocitus, who called out to him and made him a Red Lantern. With this newfound power of the Red Lantern ring, the Rage Kitty exacted his sweet revenge on the hoodlums and flew to say goodbye to his owner one last time, saying, in his little cat language, "I find who hurt you, I kill. I, good kitty." I love this cat, but I also wouldn't dare mess with it. Ever. Number 8. Prometheus. Heroes and villains with no powers always seem to be some of the most powerful. It's strange. Take Prometheus. After seeing his criminal parents pass at the hands of police, he vows a vendetta on any form of justice. A vendetta that would push him to be able to defeat the whole Justice League single-handedly. He shot the Martian Manhunter with a dart that turned his power against him and set him on fire. He infected Steel's armor with a computer virus which commanded the suit to damage the Watchtower. He hypnotized the Huntress into unconsciousness. He attacked Green Lantern with a neural chaff that rendered his ring useless. He trapped the Angel Zariel in limbo. He tricked the Flash into believing that he had planted motion-sensitive devices that would explode if the Flash used his powers. And he defeated Batman in hand-to-hand combat. That's probably the most nuts thing on this list. His origin is very similar to Batman's. After his parents were dispatched from the mortal plane, he would travel the globe training and becoming the ultimate combat machine. But he also attended the top universities, learning as much as he could. He eventually sets up a base in the Ghost Zone. And from here, he built an armor that could download information on any opponent's fighting style, kind of reminiscent of Taskmaster's ability. He is kind of crazy capable, and his vendetta on any kind of justice plus his Batman likeness just makes him kind of a little strange to me, but also terrifying.
Number 7. Major Victory. Major Victory is also known as Vance Astro, or Major Astro. While he has a counterpart on the Earth 616 reality who is known as Justice, the Vance Astro of Earth 691 from the original Guardians team actually existed before his main continuity counterpart, so he could actually be considered more the original version of that character than even the main continuity version of that character. Vance Astro was a member of the US Air Force who ended up becoming an astronaut, one of the first astronauts to be shot into space. He was sent up in suspended animation, but by the time he arrived at his destination over 1,000 years later, it turned out others on the planet had basically beaten him to colonizing it. Ah, shucks, don't you hate when that happens? Still, Major Vance Astro set out to record the planet's flora and fauna, as was also part of his mission, one of the parts that he could still obviously complete. He'd run into Yondu, fighting him initially, but later befriending him, and then the two would come together to form a part of the original roster of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Major Victory has psionic powers that are actually mutant in origin. He also has a striking look with his suit, which also apparently protects him from rapidly aging. Yeah, if he ever takes his suit off, he's just like, ah! Aging. Number 6, Baby Groot. I mean, I love Baby Groot, but he's also one of the oddest members of the Guardians team. Obviously, this version of Groot was designed with merchandise for the franchise in mind, as Baby Groot is by far like the cutest member of the team and one of the cutest things that has ever existed, I think, on planet Earth. But even Baby Groot is still Groot, and it should also be noted that while adorable, he also just straight up murders a lot of people by growing right through them. Kinda makes him even more awesome and definitely more weird that he's so little but also so deadly. Baby Groot only existed in the MCU for a short time, appearing in Volume 2 of Guardians of the Galaxy before growing into Teenage Groot. Comic book versions of the pint-sized Groot also appeared in the 2017 series I Am Groot and in the Reality of Earth 415, aka the Future Fight universe. Possibly there are even more comic book versions of Baby Groot, but these are the only ones that I know of, so if you know about more versions of him, just put them in the comments and we can all read all the versions of Baby Groot. Number 5, Angela. Angela is a weird but ultimately very cool character. She has had a long history when it comes to comics that actually started even before she showed up in Marvel. Initially, she started out in Spawn, where she was an enemy of Spawn due to her being an angelic Hellspawn slayer. However, Neil Gaiman fought for the rights to his work on Spawn and basically ended up as such winning back the rights to Angela. He then sold that character to Marvel Comics, and she ended up making both appearances in Gaiman's own Marvel Alternate Earth of 1602, as well as the main continuity, where she was basically established as Thor's lost sister. In a weird turn of events, Angela now has an established history with the Guardians of the Galaxy team, being considered an ally, friend, and at one point even a member. They accompanied her on her first trip to Earth, she helped them fight against Iron Man during Civil War II, they helped her to get her demonic baby sister, who also of course is Thor's baby sister, to the safety of heaven, and at one point also fought to free her when she was imprisoned. So yeah, they have this weird long relationship that I'm like so here for. Kinda random, but also Angela is also quite cosmic, so I guess not so random, because everyone that's from Asgard is both like magical and cosmic when you think about it. Best of both worlds. Number 4, Drax. Even though he's considered one of the most famous members now, especially thanks to the success of the Guardians team via the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Drax is still a super weird character. Even more so in the comics. Let me explain. His backstory is that he was actually a human living on Earth who was a musician. He was traveling back from a performance one night with his family in tow who had come to watch him perform when they ended up being attacked by Thanos. Kinda like a wrong place, wrong time deal here. Thanos in his ship just kinda happened to show up near the lone road that they were driving down in the desert. Not wanting anyone to see him, he attacked and seemingly killed the family, except he didn't really kill them because some of them survived. The father, Arthur Douglas, who we now know as Drax, and daughter, Heather Douglas, were both saved by Thanos' father, Mentor, who felt bad for basically what his son had done and was like kind of keeping tabs on him at the time. He attempted to make amends by giving them new life, with Heather traveling to Titan, where she was raised and would become the hero Moondragon, and Arthur's spirit being saved and put into a new body which had superpowers, becoming known as Drax the Destroyer. So he no longer really looks like Arthur Douglas at all, but technically he has Arthur's spirit. Number 3, Ant-Man. Ant-Man is just a kind of random pick for the Guardians of the Galaxy team, but we love Ant-Man, so I'm fine with him being a member in the end. I just love Scott Lang, he's such a fun guy. For the purpose of this list, by the way, when I do say Ant-Man, I am talking about Scott Lang, not Hank Pym or the infamous Eric O'Grady. Scott Lang ends up joining the all-new, all-different Guardians of the Galaxy team, which I will say has quite a lineup when it comes to the members and allies of the team. This kind of seems like a pretty cool book, actually. I haven't read All New, All Different, but I feel like now I need to after doing some research on it for this list. Ant-Man actually ends up on the team after stowing away on their ship because he wanted to leave planet Earth. The Guardians find him out, but basically respond to his stowaway attempt by simply inviting Lang to join the team.
Number 2, New Fantastic Four. What If This Was the Fantastic Four is a comic that was a tribute to illustrator Mike Wieringo, who unexpectedly passed away while working on this story. And even if that wasn't the case, it is still one of my favorite what ifs. The original Fantastic Four is brought to an end by the Skrull agent Delilah, and in their place, a team of 4 heroes step up to the plate, if not with a bit of reluctance. Spider-Man, Wolverine, the Incredible Hulk, and Ghost Rider. Ben Grimm was the only member of the original team who survived, and at their funeral he gave gave this new team his blessing while he went off to raise Franklin Richards. This new team came under attack from cosmic beings who seemed to sense the Earth losing one of its major teams. But this was all orchestrated by Dr. Doom, as I'm sure no one is surprised by. Thanks to Ghost Rider's inclusion on the team though, Mephisto uses Doom and possesses him, and creates a team of the hero's villains who are power boosted with infernal magic. So Venom, Abomination, Sabretooth, and Sandman. This fearsome four, as they call themselves, do battle with the new team, eventually being defeated, revealing the Mephisto-possessed Doom, who almost destroys the team until he is stopped by a combined effort of the citizens of New York and Spider-Man utilizing the Disruptor that finish off the Fantastic Four to save the people of New York, Dr. Doom, and the day. Nice. Number 1. Thanos. Okay, so bear with me here. In the What If Infinity Dark Reign story, Norman Osborn, after becoming the director of Hammer and the Dark Avengers, figures out how to get his hands on the Infinity Gauntlet, defeating the Illuminati and all the heroes and becoming the Goblin King. Using the gauntlet, he creates a world completely under his tyrannical rule, and he teleports his horrible father from the past to show him the things he has done in an attempt to get his father's love and admiration, something he never had, and still doesn't. Honestly. His father begins to bash him for becoming a tyrannical ruler, which is a little sadder given the fact that it was his fault Norman even turned out this way in the first place. Teleporting them both back to the Dark Avengers base, the entire team has been destroyed. As Norman is trying to figure out exactly what has happened here, it's revealed that Thanos is the one who's done it, and he's shown up to collect the gauntlet. Thanos is incredibly awesome, but unfortunately, not even the Mad Titan is a match for someone wielding the Infinity Gauntlet, and he is dispatched, but not before he tells Norman that he is trying to get the love of someone who will never give it to him. After Thanos is gone, Norman's father, being forced by the Infinity Stones, begins to tell Norman how great he is, and Norman loses his mind, wiping his father from all existence, all time, and all space, which was dumb, because now Norman Osborn's existence is a paradox, and he and this world he created fade into emptiness. So yes, Thanos is the hero here in a very weird roundabout way.
At number 10, we have Maggot. This guy gives me the creeps, and for good reason. He basically has 2 carnivorous worms on either one of his shoulders that devour anything on command. And they don't do it just as an offensive attack, but so that they can harvest the energy of the target and return it to Maggot's stomach, offering him a temporary boost of strength and durability. Honestly, this guy could come off as cool in some weird way to some people, but to me, his powers are just too gross and too much of a hassle to even be worth it. Most superheroes just have super strength and durability as a base set of powers, and Maggot, well, he has to get his worms to eat someone just to get those basic abilities, and only temporarily too. The weirdness factor for this mutant comes from his look, but also from the strange lengths he has to go to just to get on an even keel of power to most of his peers.
Number 9. Forget-Me-Not. Forget-Me-Not basically has the power of me in high school. His abilities allow him to basically be unnoticeable, so much so that he had been on the X-Men roster for 6 years and no one remembered it. As an X-Men, he battled the Brood and fought in the Age of X story, and has honestly saved their behinds on more than one occasion before he actually first appeared in X-Men Legacy number 300 in March of 2014. He is literally both real and not real at the same time, which is a concept I am just too dumb to properly explain. He played a key role in X-Force Volume 4 number 10 in 2014 when the X-Men tried to get him to help with one of the key conflicts being, quote unquote, how can they hope to find a mutant who slips out of memory whenever he leaves their sight? Only problem is, he can't control his powers at all. So how do we prove he even exists? I mean, other than him actually being legitimately written in the comics, his actions and use of things can be perceived, like his use of toilet paper, allowing people to logically conclude that he could exist. Also, his powers were shown to leave distortions on camera records. I don't know how cameras forget him, but it's a comic book, so give me a break. A few mutants could detect him, like Phantom X, who said Forget-Me-Not was overweight, which is kind of rude.
At number 8, we have Skin. First off, the name. It's like a writer coined this name at 4 AM after forgetting they had a deadline the next morning. And the powers are equally bizarre. He's basically able to stretch his skin by about 4 to 6 feet and use it to swing around or tie up bad guys. He's like Mr. Fantastic, except it's only his skin, so I imagine it's like a little less durable and he probably can't pull the guys in as strong as if they were actually his limbs. And in my opinion, the worst of it is that when skin is just hanging out and not actively holding in his skin, it just hangs off of him at its longest length, with his skeleton staying the same size, which is kinda gross. It's like a beanbag chair but without any filling, and instead of styrofoam beads, it's a full-on skeleton and organs. He's also a nightmarish pale blue-gray, which, I don't know, they could have at least made him look healthy, you know? Anyway, skin at number 8.
Number 7. Colonel Bruce Banner. What if Bruce Banner was actually the monster and Hulk was just purely the good guy? Well, that is the question we dive into in issue 91 of the 1989 series. Here, Bruce Banner mistreats his wife, Betty Ross, who eventually becomes, of course, Betty Banner. Bruce is cruel and unkind, but after he is involved in a gamma radiation explosion, another half of him emerges, a glowing green, light-like figure who is gentle and kind and we know as Starman. Basically, this world's Hulk. And he was actually terrified of Bruce himself. Not only is this villain pretty interesting, unique, and strange, but the story is also like epically sad. Despite Betty reaching out for help to both her father and others around her, it seems that no one actually really believes Betty when it comes to the fact that Bruce mistreats her. In the end, she is confined to a mental institution as she's believed to have gone insane. But at least there she appears to be safe from Bruce and his cruelty, so it's like a sad but I guess sort of happy ending. It's bittersweet is what it is. Ugh. Number 6. Mr. Fantastic. So, Mr. Fantastic in this story is still Reed Richards, but he's also Doctor Doom. Let me explain. In issue number 6 of the 1997 What If series, we get to explore an alternate world where the Fantastic Four were granted different powers. These powers seem to have been inspired more by their personality traits. As such, Reed Richards becomes a big brain. Literally, he's just a brain. Instead of him staying as a big disembodied brain though, with mental or psionic capacities, if you will, he ends up being convinced by Dr. Doom to go with him so that Doom might help him by using his knowledge of robotics to build him a humanoid body. You know that when Doom is like, please, let me help you, Reed Richards. That's not what's about to happen. In reality, Doom's plan is to use Reed's powerful brain form to power his time travel machine. The Fantastic Four come to save Reed and a battle ensues, eventually resulting in a massive explosion when Doom attempts to activate his machine. Just as the explosion goes off though, Reed manages to use his mental brain powers to move his mind into Doom's body. As a result, Doom, which I assume moves into Reed's brain form, ends up dead, and Reed lives on, but within the scarred body of Dr. Doom. So now it just looks like Doom is leading the FF. Pretty cool, but also pretty weird. Number 5. Space Admiral von Strucker. In the What If story from issue number 14 of the 1977 series, we answer the question, what if Sergeant Fury had fought World War II in outer space? Turns out that events would be, as expected, pretty weird. The whole premise is that on this alternate Earth, humans got to space a lot sooner and ended up being pulled into a conflict where they fought against the Baytans. Strucker himself was an admiral. Strucker would end up on the side of humanity but would ultimately betray humankind and Earth to ally himself with the Baytans. He saw an opportunity for Germany, who he was more loyal to than, just Earth in general, even though, Germany's part of Earth, so I feel like maybe an interesting choice on his part. Basically, he believed that if the Baytans took over as their allies, Germany would be in a better place than they were now, so he decided to betray his fellow space soldiers. Which actually I guess kinda does make sense considering everything that happened after World War I. Space wars are always fun and weird though, and this story and its antagonists are, of course, no exception. Number 4. Hypno-Fish. The Hypno-Fish that appears in What If issue number 1 from the 1977 series is actually a character that has appeared in the main continuity. A character? A type of fish? Whether there is only a single Hypno-Fish or more than one. This is a character who has only made a few appearances in even the main continuity since their first 616 appearance in 1963 in Fantastic Four issue number 14. But they also appear as Namor the Submariner's villainous ally in the first What If issue, where we answer the question, what if Spider-Man had joined the Fantastic Four? The end result is that Namor successfully uses his Hypno-Fish friend to kidnap Sue Storm, but instead of being rescued as she was in issue number 14 of FF, she ends up staying with Namor and ultimately becoming his queen, all because Spider-Man is on the team, which leaves her kind of feeling like isolated from them. In the end, his Hypno-Fish and Mento-Fish plot is successful, and Sue chooses to remain with Namor. Also, yes, there are also mentofish. That's a thing too. An even more rare thing than hypnofish, I believe. Number 3, Loki, Prince of Jotunheim. Another one of my favorite episodes from Marvel's and Disney Plus's What If series, for just how lighthearted and adorable it was one that asked the question, what if Thor were an only child? The answer was that Thor would basically be kind of a well-loved brat who was obsessed with partying as opposed to heroics. Not only did we get Party Thor in this episode though, we also got friendly frost giant Loki, who is also known of course as the Prince of Jotunheim. Instead of Loki being adopted by Odin and growing up to be the villain we normally know him as, the sort of jealous and vengeful brother of Thor, he becomes Thor's best friend and ally, who also seems to enjoy a good party. And I gotta say, I kinda love it. Super weird and super great. Number 2, Galactus. Galactus is a pretty complex character. Sometimes he's a villain, at times he's been a hero. Currently, I'm pretty sure in the main continuity he's dead and his corpse is maybe being used as part of Thor's throne room, but either way, when it comes down to it, despite being a cosmic inevitability, Galactus often threatens entire worlds with his hunger, which, you know, it feels pretty villainous. And yet even he can end up with a happy ending where he gets to enjoy the simple life. All it takes is for Thanos to use the Infinity Gauntlet to wipe his mind and send him to Earth to live as a human. Hey, it's so easy. In this story, this attempt to neutralize Galactus results in him being recognized, despite his amnesia, as Elvis. This is because Galen in his human form happens to sound and look just like Elvis, coincidentally. When Adam Warlock finds him after defeating Thanos and offers to return Galactus to his prior form and power, he actually refuses and decides to live out his days on Earth with his new partner Gertrude and her son, basically filling in as the planet's, I guess, Elvis replacement following the mysterious death of the real Elvis. Which, I mean, fair enough. I mean, if I came to Earth and then people thought I was Elvis, I'd probably be like, you know what, I think I'm good, I'll just chill here, this is a pretty good life. Number 1, Juggernaut. In this bizarre what if issue, we asked the question, what if Professor X of the X-Men had become the Juggernaut? Which is a strange question and is also a great question. Obviously, instead of his brother Kane Marco. Obviously, who is normally the Juggernaut. This story takes place in the pages of issue 13 of the 1989 What If series. Here we see that Professor X is trapped under the rubble of the caved-in tomb where Sidorak's gem awaited an avatar. So Charles becomes the avatar of Sidorak and not only gains great physical power, but has his psychic mutant power basically increased as well. Because he was not around to form the X-Men, the Fantastic Four fight against Magneto in their place, which causes anti-mutant hysteria as a result. In response, when Juggernaut surfaces, he creates his own team of mutants to enforce anti-human laws in response. Woo! Becoming a powerful villain as opposed to friend and ally of humankind. Would have gone a lot differently.
At number 10, we have Hindsight Lad. Okay, there are going to be some joke characters on here, but I'm not messing around when I say that some of these extra weird ones would actually do well in the MCU, at least for a moment. For example, Hindsight Lad. Although he's very silly and probably not meant to be more than a gag character in the comics, I think would be a very funny throwaway joke for the bigger Marvel fans. In the comics, Hindsight Lad is actually just computer programmer Carlton Lafroige, who tries to pass off the ability of learning from the past as a superpower to make it onto the new Warriors team. What's even dumber than the name is that he actually makes it onto the team and quickly becomes the least liked member. But I don't see the MCU taking the joke that far, but I could see a non-superpowered supporting character taking on the goofy mantle for a one-off joke. At number 9, we have Dupe. As silly as this character seems, he's not much more bizarre than Rocket Raccoon, and that character has proven to have made a seamless transition into the MCU since his debut in 2014. Okay, Dupe is a little sillier. He's an alien creature who looks like a green bean with arms and a face, but he has a huge range of powers and an actually pretty impressive strength level, giving him enough to hold up in a battle with Thor. He can shoot psionic energy and also use, get this, bass guitar to channel the power of the funk. He also uses a gun called the Ultimate Nullifier, which shoots bees, chainsaws, and bowling balls out of it. He's probably the weirdest character on this list in all respects, but maybe he would be a fun cameo in a battle set in space in an upcoming movie, or maybe just somewhere in the background for a second. Once again, I really think this character should only exist as a fun moment and not by any means be featured in any front-running role. I don't want to watch the MCU destroy their legacy any more than the next guy. At number 8, we have Phone Ranger. Okay, it's getting hard to keep up this charade that I actually want these characters woven into the MCU in any major way. I think it's fair to say that any of these heroes so far would be funny to see briefly just for the meme of it, but I don't want to pretend I'd actually want a Phone Ranger series or even a scene with him any longer than 2 minutes. Because this hero is literally a phone repairman with a mini spaceship. After an average phone repairman named A.G. Bell discovers a tiny ship trapped in one of the phones he's repairing, he gains access to every communication system in the world. This isn't the most compelling power set or origin story, but I don't know, maybe we could even just see an homage to this weird superhero when Ant-Man flies a tiny ship out of a telephone speaker or something? I don't know.
Number 7. What if Aunt May died instead of Uncle Ben? Ready to be depressed? Great. Because in this what if story, we are given a first-hand look at what happens to Peter if Aunt May was the one to lose her life instead of Uncle Ben. Peter, fueled by rage, goes after her killer and ends his life, but unexpectedly, Uncle Ben shows up, and he takes the fall for Peter, going to jail. Now, Peter is going through life with no real moral center to help guide him, and he hates the idea of being Spider-Man. He becomes a bit of a troubled kid. He goes to juvenile prison, escapes, lives on the street, and when he is almost at his breaking point, he tries to break Uncle Ben out of prison. Instead of going with him though, Uncle Ben convinces Peter to make Aunt May proud. Peter takes it to heart. He fixes his life. He meets Mary Jane. He focuses on school, being a hero when the world really needs him, and eventually Ben gets out of prison on good behavior, and that's when we finally get the power and responsibility speech, which leads to Peter becoming Spider-Man more permanently. And with Uncle Ben as a Spider-Man version of Bruce Wayne's Alfred, he goes on to become the hero New York deserves. Number 6. Thaddeus Hulk Ross. So it turns out that if Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross were the one to save Rick Jones from the Gamma Bomb and become irradiated and become the Hulk, he wouldn't last very long at all. That's what happens in What If General Ross had become the Hulk. Gamma affects everyone differently, as the Watcher tells us, and for the General, he immediately turns into a Hulk, but retained his intelligence only without being able to properly speak or really handle the situations he was now in properly. For example, he accidentally completely squashed Rick Jones. He stopped Igor, the Russian spy who caused the Gamma explosion, but also caused untold damage in the process. And after fighting the military, it turns out he threw a tank that traveled all the way to the house of Betty Ross' daughter. The tank he threw crushed the house with Betty inside. He went to find her as she would be the only one who's able to actually help him in this situation that he's in, and instead all he found was the result of what he had done, and a weeping Bruce Banner. Ross transforms back into his regular form, which allows Bruce to pull out a weapon and end the life of this now tormented Ross. I'm sorry, I know this didn't end on a particularly happy note. This is, I guess, the more depressing story than that Spider-Man one. Number 5. Ghost Rider. Honestly, not even sure how this makes sense, but in this What If comic, Marvel, the comic company, exists as a comic book company that writes all the same comics it normally would, including comic books about Ghost Rider Robbie Reyes, who also happens to be an intern at Marvel in this story, but is also still Ghost Rider. Look, I never said that these things had to make sense, okay? What is honestly even weirder is that the studios of Marvel are being visited by this Nordic death metal band called Hassenwald from Latveria, who have fun clubs all over the world, including in Wakanda. Oh, and they also have been accused of witchcraft, church burning, and eating people. It turns out to all be true, as while they are visiting Marvel, they sacrifice the donkey who runs the printing press and use its blood to create possessed Ghost Rider comics that turn the world into a hellscape, making them the ultimate rulers of it, using the power of the old gods to do so. Now, Robbie Reyes is trapped in this hellscape world where Hassenwald has dispatched the Marvel Universe and he needs to save it. Number 4. Magneto in cyberspace. From one utterly bonkers story to another. At least this one's a bit better. In What If X-Men, we have a really strange alternate world. A post-apocalyptic one, but one that's gone completely digital, and humanity's mutations lie in their internet connection rather than in their DNA, with mutants having the EXE gene instead of the X gene. This issue follows two very different versions of Domino and Cable as they are tasked by Xavier to rescue Eric, aka Magneto, a digital entrepreneur taken hostage. Except he isn't a good guy. Surprise. No, he is actually masterminding a whole digital coup, but using his powers and Domino, Xavier connects to Eric, takes over his body and mind, and erases him from cyber existence. At least that's what I gathered when I was reading it. I really have no idea what the heck is happening here. It's really strange, but you should definitely check it out. Number 3. Iron Man the Traitor? In one of the first ever What Ifs, when Iron Man is famously captured and forced to create weapons, he still creates the Iron Man armor, but the change comes when instead of of booting up and busting his way out of there, he is held captive. The boot up sequence takes too long, and Jensen's sacrifice doesn't buy him enough time. Tony is found and restrained before he can do anything. Now that he has been found and this new weapon, the Iron Man armor, is discovered, the leader of the terror organization, Chen Lu, plants a device in the arc reactor that keeps Tony alive that allows him to shut it off remotely if Tony doesn't do what they say. And he implants a communication device in Tony's skull so that Chen Lu can spy on and control Tony. Then he lets him be discovered and he goes back to being like normal Tony Stark. But thanks to the fact that he can now control Tony, he forces him to become a hero, like he would have anyways, gain the trust of the superhero community, and then learn secrets pertaining to S.H.I.E.L.D. But it's once Tony is ordered to dispatch Reed Richards and goes to complete the mission that it's revealed that Tony had been recording a tape by speaking incredibly slowly, and he sent that tape to Reed, who, when he played it at a faster speed, learned of the situation Iron Man was in. So once their fight began, Iron Man eventually got incapacitated by Reed, who actually helped him remove the device inside Tony's heart, giving Tony the chance to get his revenge. It's kind of a weird way of doing that.
Number 2, Rocket. Rocket is somehow even more weird of a character in the comics as well in comparison to the MCU, which Rocket is a really weird character, so how can it get weirder? Let me tell you about it. Although even by the MCU standard of Guardians, he's probably one of the weirdest team members, Rocket Raccoon looks exactly like a Terra-based or Earth raccoon, but claims not to be. When it comes to the MCU, we mainly know that he is a victim of intense experimentation, having been, and I quote, torn apart and put back together over and over and turned into some little monster. It is believed that Rocket had his intelligence greatly improved and as such was made sentient. However, due to the traumatic nature of the experimentation, Rocket also seemingly developed a chaotic personality. In the comics, Rocket is actually a hero from another planet, where he and other animals were experimented on and given sentience by robots. The robots had been charged with looking after basically mentally unwell humanoid aliens that lived there indefinitely and wanted to escape this indefinite task, giving the animals on the planet intelligence so that they could basically replace the robots, who then could basically just peace and go build their own world and home on the far side of the same planet. Rocket was one of these animals. Toys were also essential to keeping the patients on the planet calm and in good spirits. And the patients on this planet, by the way, are referred to as loonies, which pretty problematic, but anyways, we'll just keep going on and pretend that didn't happen. But civil unrest between the animals would eventually lead to an all-out toy war between animal-run toy production tycoons and companies. Number 1, Agent Venom. Not necessarily a weird character, just someone who feels pretty weird on this team, especially considering how his involvement with the team kinda all went down. Agent Venom is Flash Thompson, a specific identity for Flash. Agent Venom was the name Spider-Man bully turned ally Flash Thompson took when he merged with the Venom symbiote. I guess Venom is pretty cosmic, so sure, but Flash certainly is not cosmic. He's very street level as a person, or at least he wasn't cosmic prior to this, prior to him joining the Guardians. Flash joined the team and went along for a ride to Clintar, where the Venom symbiote reconnected with the Hive and basically was purified. And outside of that storyline, he really didn't do too much while on the Guardians team, which is kind of a waste of a character who is as powerful as Agent Venom. And then I'm pretty sure after that he was like, I'm gonna travel space and be a knight. And yeah, it's a weird time. Number 10, Kraven the Spider Hunter. We know on Earth 8 there is a Spider-Woman who happens to resemble Kraven somewhat, but did you know that on Earth 31 there actually is a Sergei Kravinoff who simply is Spider-Man? Yep, Kraven is known as Hunter Spider, who after being exposed to a giant spider's spider venom while hunting a lion in Zimbabwe, became himself a spider-themed hero. Hunter Spider specifically focuses on hunting spider-themed villains in New York City. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, if you love it when we talk about alternate spider folks, be sure to let us know by clicking that subscribe button. I know there's a bunch of you out there that aren't subscribed, and if that's who you are, maybe subscribe. It's a nice thing to do. Helps us out. Number 9, Spider. Spider. Penny Parker's story is really just strange. I mean, even her superhero name is pretty strange. SP//DR. Penny Parker hails from the reality of Earth 14512. Here she pilots a mech that is connected to her through her genes and a spider bite. The spider bite connects her to the suit, as the spider that bit her actually makes up half of the mech suit known as Spider's CPU. In her alternate reality, she also has a rival in Addie Brock, who ends up as the pilot of the mech suit known as Venom, or as it's spelled there, VEN #M, or £, if you prefer. Penny is weird in the sense that a lot of her story, while still echoing the canon, feels like such a fresh take on the origin of Spider-Man, which is also why I love it. Number 8. The Spider. On Earth 15, Spider-Man is the exact opposite of a hero. He is a villain, a criminal, and one of the most extreme kinds of criminals, a serial killer. He merged with a symbiote that is basically Carnage to become the Spider. His sense of humor is extremely dark, and he actually takes joy in hurting others. Despite joining the Timebreakers, the Spider later tries to take over multiple different universes and ends up being killed during his attempt. So while he is really creepy and disturbing, at least he's gone now. Or at least he's gone for now. The Spider was one of the characters and teammates that appeared in Exiles, making his first appearance in the 2001 Exiles series in issue number 12, but eventually was killed in issue number 44. While we know about Peter Parker and his role as the Spider on Earth 15 as a serial killer with a symbiotic suit, we don't really know anything else about his home reality. So yeah, I wonder if all the other heroes are also villains there.
At number 7 is New Avengers Illuminati. This is originally known as a one-off storyline, but it's become known as the origin to how the now popular Illuminati were formed in the context of Marvel. And it's still a surprise to most readers that it ended up actually working, mainly because it features so many heavy hitters that it's hard to imagine how they'd all cooperate with one another. Originally formed to feature all the smartest minds in Marvel, the Illuminati also seemed like a weird move to add yet another superhero team to Marvel's roster, with Iron Man, Mr. Fantastic, Professor X, Black Panther, Black Bolt, Doctor Strange, Namor, and Yellow Jacket. It's hard to imagine that this group actually gelled and didn't get written off as too overpowered. But it's actually become one of the cult favorite superhero groups in all of Marvel and DC Comics, which is fun to see because otherwise these characters don't really have much business appearing in the same storyline, let alone the same room as one another. At number 6, we have Superman Red Sun. This storyline is a weird one in that it tells the story of Superman being a Soviet hero, with his ship having crash landed in Soviet Ukraine rather than Kansas. With Lex Luthor being the president of the United States and Superman's childhood love being replaced by a Soviet party member named Lana Lazarenko, it initially appears to just be a story of what-ifs set in the Cold War era. Superman finds himself at the helm of the US-Russia conflict with President Luthor, which escalates in a similar fashion to the actual events of the Cold War. On top of all this, we also see an anti-revolutionary Batman trying to avenge his parents' death at the hand of the secret police, which all just seems super bizarre and convoluted at first. But what ends up making this storyline stand out as one of the more iconic and celebrated DC storylines is how it offers commentary to real international conflicts in the modern world. Published in 2005, it doesn't quite speak to these issues as they are today, but it does remind us how complicated and long-winded the tensions between the East and the West have been. At number 5 is Batman: The Return of Bruce Wayne. This storyline is a really fun one and is only weird because of how unusual the adventure is for Bruce Wayne. The story starts after the events of Final Crisis when Batman is zapped by Darkseid's Omega beams and sent back to the Paleolithic era, aka the Stone Age. He then has to fight his way through every different epoch of human history until he gets to the present, influencing the world around him as he goes. For example, he inadvertently starts a bat-worshipping cult in the Stone Age, which he then finds artifacts of during his time fighting Blackbeard in the 18th century. The Grant Morrison story really adds a lot to the mythology of Batman as well, and much of it has become canon, like Batman's 17th century ancestor Nathaniel Wayne. The story itself could be considered pretty strange, seeing as it begins in a caveman setting, but the depth of the adventure and the place it ends up really makes this weird story actually work really well. At number 4, we have Vision Volume 2. Released in 2015, this storyline explores the story of Vision trying to find purpose in life through the pursuit of a nuclear family. With a wife and 2 kids, they become the android family on the block and for the most part deal with pretty mundane human problems. At least at first. When this first came out, it may have struck readers as being a little too strange to actually work, but there is more depth to this 12-part maxi series than was first expected of it. In choosing to create his own family, Vision seems to be adjusting the protocol instilled in him by his creator Ultron. Instead of pursuing something of a set purpose, like Ultron's proposition of cleansing the Earth of humanity, Vision wants to set off on a pursuit of the unobtainable, which he deems to be the essence of freedom. And in the case of this series, that unattainable goal seems to be the American dream. This series ended up being so influential that it's one of the main inspirations for the hit Disney Plus series WandaVision. At number 3 is House of X and the Powers of X. This storyline chronicles the events of X-Men creating their own nation state on an island called Krakoa. This utopian society is meant to be only inhabited by mutants and is led by Professor X, Magneto, and Apocalypse. Not only does this island allow mutants to live beyond the controlling grips of humanity, but it also allows them to come back to life upon death, thanks to a group of mutants known as the Five. After a long drawn-out conflict with the humans, Krakoa becomes more of a haven for mutants than anyone could have hoped for, unless you're the governments of the world, because of course, conflict still follows the mutants to the island in the form of a looming war between man-made Sentinels and the X-Men. And though readers may have been thinking an island inhabited by mutants might have had its issues plot-wise, it's actually become one of the most iconic X-Men stories in all of Marvel, and is discussed online as being one of the more feasible ways for Marvel to integrate the X-Men into the MCU, whether they go with it or not. At number 2 we have Superior Spider-Man. This storyline really is a long shot. For those who aren't aware, Superior Spider-Man is the version of Spider-Man that's taken on by Dr. Otto Octavius, aka Dr. Octopus, at least at first. In a massive twist of fate, Doc Ock actually takes over for Peter Parker after his death, and the result is a more advanced version of the hero with retractable arms and a plethora of new gadgets. What's even weirder though is that Doc Ock's mind has been transferred to Peter Parker's body, meaning that he doesn't actually appear as himself when out of the costume. This first takes place in Amazing Spider-Man number 697 and eventually veers into another comic series called Avenging Spider-Man, where Otto continues his run as the web slinger. It's a pretty insane idea to try something like this, but it's actually yielded a really cool version of Spider-Man and even shows us another side to Doc Ock that we surely wouldn't have been introduced to otherwise. Finally, at number 1 we have Watchmen. This now insanely popular comic book series wasn't meant to be a massive success. It started as a 12-part maxi series in 1986, set in an alternate true reality where Nixon is president and New York City is the setting instead of a Gotham or a Metropolis. Except the one catch is that in our world, superheroes are real, with only one of them, Dr. Manhattan, actually having real superpowers. It's a real look at what the world would be like if certain people decided to take on the violent lifestyle of being a vigilante in modern day America. And the result is clearly something that people were interested in. But of course, like anything, it wasn't expected to be quite as big of a hit as it was. The characters were originally going to be pulled from old comics by the discontinued Charlton Comics, giving new life to a group of obscure heroes, but due to copyright issues and other bureaucratic complications, writer Alan Moore and illustrator Dave Gibbons were forced to develop their own characters from scratch, which could have led to the series being a total failure since this adds a lot of extra work and new names might have curbed the interest of diehard DC fans. But it's good that they did it, because in the end, we got Watchmen.
Number 10, Spider-Man. If you were wondering if I misspoke there, no I did not. Spider-Man is one of my favorite alternates out there actually, because, well, he's just so creepy. He's definitely a weirdo because he is literally made out of spiders. Ugh. This version of Peter Parker, instead of being bit by a radioactive spider, actually fell into basically like a vat of experimental spiders. As a result, he was consumed by them, and his consciousness manifested within them. Although the real Peter Parker was actually dead and gone, being completely devoured, his mind lived on in the spiders who were connected by his consciousness and came together to create basically a humanoid form. This version of Spider-Man really can never reveal his secret identity, as doing so would reveal that he's actually not a person at all, but just a bunch of spiders all huddled together in the shape of a man. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love when we talk about Spider-Man content, I love talking about Spider-Man and all of the Spider-Verse stuff, be sure to check out our Spider-Man playlist. We've got a lot more content over there for you. Number 9, Web Slinger. I love this alternate Spider-Man. While odd, I'd also say he's a pretty cool variant as well. This alternate version of Spider-Man hails from the Wild Wild West. Patrick O'Hara hails from the alternate reality of Earth 31913. He was a traveler who would show off his shooting skills in shows, giving gun presentations. Doc Morbius also traveled along with him. While Patrick would show off his shooting skills along the road, Morbius would sell his elixir. One day the elixir doused a radioactive spider and after that spider bit Patrick, he noticed he now had spider-like abilities and powers. Tragically, Morbius began to drink his elixir, which actually turned him into a vampire, forcing the webslinger to track down his once old friend and defeat him. That's what you do to vampires, especially when they're being all creepy and drinking people's blood. Number 8. Spider-Punk. Spider-Punk is a strange one, but is also another favorite of mine from the Spider-Verse. Spider-Punk seems to be one of the alternate versions of Spider-Man that we'll see appearing in Across the Spider-Verse. This version of Spider-Man is not Peter Parker, but instead Hobby Brown, or Hobbert Brown. In this reality, Hobby Brown is a punk rocker who not only possesses spider-like abilities, but also the power of rock. In fact, at one point he actually used his music skills to defeat an alternate version of Venom, cranking up the volume and using an army of amps. Now of course this Venom was very different, but still, it's a super cool story. I love it. Number 7. Hand suckers on the hands. If you thought the plasma thing was weird, it only really gets weirder when it comes to Morbius in the Spider-Man animated series. In the animated series, Morbius not only needed plasma instead of just straight up blood to live, but he also had fangs that basically went unused. I know what you're thinking, but wait a minute, Amanda, hold up! Don't vampires feed on their victims using their fangs? Yes, in folklore they're either actually using their fangs to rend the flesh of their victims so that they can basically feast on their blood, or in some cases they actually even feed through their fangs using their especially long and pointed incisors like we would a straw. And in some cases, fangs have sort of like venom in them that sort of subdues their victim, depending on, which type of vampire we're talking about from lore. However, in the animated series, while Morbius does have fangs, he doesn't really use them to feast. In that respect, they are more there for visual clarity and effect. Instead, Morbius has tentacle-like suckers on his hands, which is how he feeds. Weird? You betcha. Number 6. Clone Saga. Some people love it, some people hate it, but if you had to collect it or organize it into a trade, all of us were likely confused by it. Even to this day, the Clone Saga remains a hard story to follow because it spanned so many different Spider-Man comics, and because we had so many Spider-Man comics. The Clone Saga is a story where Spider-Man ends up being cloned by his nemesis, the Jackal, and then upon meeting his clones begins to question if he is actually the original Peter Parker or merely a clone himself. A lot of people are not fans of the Clone Saga because of the story's twist at the end, which many felt made the emotional investment that they had put in during the crossover story feel worthless in the end. Number 5. Mutants No More. What would a weirdest things list for Marvel be without me mentioning my extreme dislike of Brotherhood of Evil Mutants originating members Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver being retconned as non-mutants. This all went down in Axis, where it was revealed via a retcon that Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver had never truly been mutants or Magneto's children, but were basically tricked into thinking so based on the High Evolutionary experimenting on them when they were young. Once the High Evolutionary was done with them, he discarded them, disguising them genetically as mutants. Wanda found out about this when she attempted to put a blood curse on her relatives, only to discover that it worked on Pietro, but not on Eric. So yes, Eric is not the father, but he still basically was with them the whole time and then was like, by the way, I'm your dad, and now he's not. I think we can still count it, even though they're not blood related, but they should be blood related. It hurts my brain. Number 4. Ultimate Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. One of the weirdest things that we've seen to this day comes from the recesses of the Marvel multiverse. Because of course it does. The Ultimate Universe is the universe of Earth 1610, which was created to be its own world and separate line from the main continuity, focused on making Marvel Comics more accessible to new fans while offering established fans a fresh take on their favorite characters, many of which were either more grounded or gritty or some combination of those two. In the case of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, I definitely say we got something unique, but not in a good way. While Wanda and her brother Pietro have always been close in the 616 continuity, 1610 took this to another level, with the two siblings having an implied romantic relationship. Yeah, not necessarily what we expected or wanted from a fresh take on these characters. Number 3. Vision loves Scarlet Witch because of Ultron? This is a weird theory that some people have in relation to Wanda and Ultron in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The belief here is that Vision, who was made by Ultron, loves Wanda, not necessarily because of his own feelings developing for her, although this does make a lot of sense just because, his character development and that is what happens in the story, but because Ultron himself perhaps had feelings for Wanda. And as crazy as this theory sounds, and perhaps non-foundational as it sounds in relation to what goes on in those movies, the The reality is it could be true, and here is why. In the Ultimate Universe, which serves to inspire much that we see in the MCU, Ultron is in love with Wanda, and it isn't any hidden love either. It's laid out in plain sight. Even weirder, obviously, is that Wanda isn't interested, as she is with her brother at the time, and Wanda's spurning of Ultron is what also apparently helps to turn him into a killer robot. Yeah, it's very different. Very fresh. Number 2. Ruins. The multiverse is full of disturbing realities, but none so disturbing, I don't think, as Ruins. Marvel's Ruins was created by Warren Ellis, with beautifully haunting artwork by Therese and Cliff Nielsen and Chris Moeller. The story that allows us to see into this world is only 2 issues in length, and yet based on the content in here, it does feel much longer. This is because Marvel Ruins is a parody of the Marvel Universe, where Ellis imagines what the heroes and villains would be like in the real world. It's bleak and disturbing, with many superpowers being practically explored in a way that turns them into more of a curse than a blessing. Number 1. Sins Past. Maybe one of the weirdest things in all of the cosmos and across multiple realities actually comes from the main reality of Earth 616. This awful thing has since been retconned away, but it still happened, and you can still go back and read it, and likely be traumatized by reading it upon doing so. That's right, we are talking about Sins Past. In this story, Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn were given added history. Doesn't sound so bad, yeah? Until you learn that this added history involved them being in a relationship together, a secret relationship where Norman got Gwen pregnant and was her first intimate lover. And as a result of their affair, they had 2 twin children who grew up to become goblins themselves. That's all I got. That's it, man. I'm just gonna throw my hands up to that, because that's insane. Initially, of their children, Gabriel was known as Grey Goblin, and later on, both Sarah and Gabriel will disguise themselves as the villain known as Kindred, which happened more recently in the comics. Don't worry though, we'd later learn that these 2 were actually just unstable clones, as opposed to being the true naturally born children of Gwen and Norman and their love affair, who fortunately were re-retconned as having never been romantically together. Thank goodness. Thank you, Nick Spencer. Thank you for fixing it.
In at 10, Matter Eater Lad. In his first appearance, Matter Eater Lad reveals his origins, sharing that the people of this mole developed the unique ability to eat all matter as a means of survival when microbes rendered their food inedible. This adaptation granted them incredible strength and durability in his teeth and jaws, enabling him to bite and chew through even the toughest of substances, similar to Superboy Mon-El's abilities. Matter Eater Lad's mother is named Mitz Kem, and his father is Rahl, who surprisingly uses Tenzil's LSH stipend to buy groceries, as depicted in the Hapless Hero in Action Comics number 381, despite both being Bismalians. There was actually a person with this power in real life, if you can believe it. This dude would eat light bulbs and bolts, and actually ended up getting eating a whole bike and a whole plane, from what I can remember. He was called Mr. Eats All if you want to look him up. In at 9, Flaming Carrot. The legend of the Flaming Carrot begins with a man who, after reading an astonishing 5,000 comics in one sitting to win a bet, suffered brain damage and emerged as the enigmatic hero known as the Flaming Carrot. Somehow. Living in Palookaville, a neighborhood in Iron City, the Carrot has faced off against multiple alien invasions. He's thwarted a communist takeover, encountered flying dead dogs, battled the Man in the Moon, outwitted death itself, and even confronted a cloned army of Hitlers. Devoid of conventional superpowers, the Flaming Carrot relies on unwavering determination, incredible luck, and a unique brand of absurdity to triumph over his adversaries. Despite experiencing death and resurrection, including a detour in Limbo, the Carrot's escapades persist. As a founding member of the Mystery Men, a group of blue-collared superheroes, Flaming Carrot's legacy has endured. Their story was later adapted into the 1999 film Mystery Men and a brief spin-off comic series, but Flaming Carrot doesn't actually appear in that movie. Characters like Mr. Furious, the Shoveler, and Dr. Heller do though, leaving the hero's origins and legend to thrive in their own extraordinary universe. In at 8, Batman Beyond. Amanda Waller, director of Project Cadmus, needed a new Batman to continue the fight for justice, and saw genetic engineering as the solution. She created Project Batman Beyond by using Bruce Wayne's DNA to rewrite a male human's reproductive material, and found a couple in Gotham City with a psychological profile nearly identical to Bruce's parents, the McGinnises. Warren McGinnis was secretly injected with the nanotech solution, and a year later, Terry was born, with half of his mother's genetic material and half of Bruce's. To complete Terry's decision to become a crime fighter, Amanda planned to have that same trauma that inspired Bruce choose to become Batman to happen to Terry. After a night at the theater watching The Grey Ghost Strikes, Amanda and the Phantasm go to Terry's parents to kill them. However, the Phantasm refuses to go along with the plan and allows the McGinnises to escape and be unaware of what might have happened. Terry later on did actually become the new Batman, but hey, having your dad's genetic material rewritten with a crime fighter, yeah, I'm gonna say that that's pretty weird.
Number 7. El Guapo. Robbie Rodriguez, who goes by El Guapo, is a mutant from the Marvel Universe, but that kind of opens up a whole bunch of questions because Robbie doesn't seem to have any real powers of his own, unless you consider his symbiotic relationship with his flying skateboard a superpower. His wiki page refers to this as idiosyncratic manipulation, suggesting that Robbie actually does have total control over his skateboard. But the problem with that statement is that his skateboard has also acted with a mind of its own, like when it beat him up for cheating on his girlfriend. Now, an argument could be made that perhaps it's his own subconsciousness beating himself up for doing the wrong thing, but that's just a me theory, and Marvel did not state this to be true or even explain his ability at all, really. It's not telekinesis, and the board seems to have a mind of its own. It's weird. I don't know what to say. Number 6. Phantom X. When I first read a comic with Phantom X in it, I did not fully understand his power, and I still don't really. So now I'm gonna try and explain something to you guys that I do not understand. Cool? Cool. So basically, Phantom X, or Charlie Cluster 7, or Weapon 13, or John Philippe, was experimented on by Weapons Plus, and was genetically grown and evolved using Sentinel technology. Thanks to this, he actually has, or had, 3 brains for independent parallel processing, nanoactive blood, and his primary nervous system is actually a detachable techno-organism called Eva. So there's some stuff to break down there. Eva can fly herself and can generate bioelectric charges to be used in attacks, with Phantom X being both telepathically and symbiotically linked to Eva. His multiple brains allow him to think like a sort of supercomputer similar to Sage, but it also gives him access to 2 extra, quote, personalities, a charmer and a super deadly mutant hunter. He can create extremely powerful illusions and enter a trance state where he can rapidly heal himself, and his self-supremacy over his own body and mind allow him to overcome pretty much anything to complete his mission, including mind control. I can't talk too much more about him because of time, but know he has enhanced senses, is a dope fighter, and does not create any kind of odor from his own body. Just look into the guy, he's really weird, but he's also really cool. Number 5. Iska the Unbeaten. Iska is thousands of years old and is the sister of Genesis, who is the wife of Apocalypse, so fun little fact for you. She is a hardened warrior who respects power and strength like the other mutants of Araco, and her powers kind of reflect that. Iska's power is tychokinesis, which is the power over luck and probability, but specifically, her power means that she cannot lose, or the better way to say it is that she always wins. This includes one-on-one contests, votes, and wagers, but also larger battles where she is a member of a team or an army. In contests of skill, her powers might give her the talents she needs to win, or she might just win through, quote, improbable circumstances. So far, it's sounding pretty good. Always winning is so good, it just sounds like ridiculous and lazy writing. It kind of is. But it also means that in larger battles or wars, her powers weigh the probability of the 2 sides and literally make her defect from the losing side and join the winning side, even if the losing side was composed of those she truly cares about, meaning that even though she still technically won, she betrayed her closest friends and allies. Her power has also famously been used against her and one of her allies. When Tarn the Uncaring faced off against Magneto, the mutant Sunspot bet Iska that Tarn would win. So because she would be betting against Tarn, someone she's fought beside for thousands of years, he was actually easily wiped off the face of Mars by Magneto, who crushed his head like a cherry. Her power is really good, it's just got some really crummy loopholes sometimes. Number 4. Adam X. Adam Naramani is honestly quite a bit interesting. He was a genetically created hybrid of both Emperor Dekun of the Shi'ar Empire and Catherine Summers from Earth. Created in an attempt to introduce more genealogies to the Shi'ar Shi'ar Empire. Now just as his origin is unique, so are his powers. Adam has the ability of electrokinetic hymopyrokinesis, or if you don't want to hurt yourself trying to say that, you can also say sanguine combustion, which sounds way cooler. It basically means that he can send an electric surge through oxygenated blood, which leads to ignition of the electrolytes present in said blood, causing a person to burn from the inside out, which could result in a little subtle warming effect, or it could completely disintegrate a person, so there's a lot of wiggle room here. Thanks to his Shi'ar side of things though, he also has enhanced strength, agility, reflexes, stamina, speed, vision, and healing. Couple all that with his awesome fighting skills and the cool cybernetic retractable claws that he has, and Extreme, which is his name, is someone you probably don't want to mess with. Number 3. Tag. I actually kinda wish I had Brian Cruz's power. It just seems like the perfect chaos creating ability, and that to me is hilarious. Tag's ability, known as the Pariah effect, allowed him to use a form of telepathy when he touched someone that caused the target to emit a psionic signal, which would make them a target for others to run away from or run towards. Whichever way people would run, they would do it while being fully aware of what they were doing, but unable to control themselves. If they were being controlled to run away, they would continue to do so until they were about 100 feet away. But if the signal caused them to run towards whoever was, quote, it, then they would dogpile on top of whoever that was. What's strange, other than everything about this, is that he could also control who was affected by the ability, but like how? He only made one person it, so how does he decide who runs away and who doesn't? He could also make whoever was it run away from themselves, which is just what? In other words, they would just run uncontrollably and in random directions, which is actually kind of hilarious. The fun thing about him is he would also always say, "You're it," which is kind of misleading because that person can't tag someone else or make them it. I don't know, it's weird, but it's really cool. Number 2, Korra of the Burning Heart. Can we please just get an applause for literally the coolest name ever? Korra of the Burning Heart is a mutant from Morocco where she served as an assassin and primarily used her power only to boost her own abilities in battle, thanks to the Iraqi being really stubborn, honor-bound fighters or whatever. But Korra's abilities can actually help others as well. Korra's heart is essentially an internalized combustion furnace, which generates life force energy. Thanks to that energy, she can get this really awesome looking flaming skeletal appearance, and she uses this constant energy source to give herself incredible physical capabilities, as well as boost up the powers of others around her to even greater heights. She was a member of the X-Terminators alongside Cable, and she is also part of SWORD. Also, Korra of the Burning Heart. Just wanted to say it again. Number 1. Chamber. Chamber, or Jonathan Evans Starsmore, discovered his powers when a blast of psionic energy that burst from his torso destroyed much of his chest and face. That doesn't sound good, but it turns out that Chamber is literally composed of that same psionic energy, with his body just acting as a shell for it. When his powers burst out of him, the wound was replaced by a constant glow of psionic fire, leaving him unable to speak. Instead, he can only communicate telepathically. Additionally, because he is made of energy, he does not eat, drink, or even breathe because he has no organs. Chamber constantly created and unleashed psionic charges of energy that could strike with volatile force, being projected as a blast from his chest, a series of guided streams that struck specific targets, or as a massive eruption striking in all directions. If he was given the time to train properly, Chamber could have potentially been one of the most powerful mutants to walk the earth. Also, in one story, he's used as literally like a jet engine on a spaceship. It's really weird, but super cool.
At number 10, we have the Korvac Saga. This one is weird in that it's very confusing and sort of bites off more than it can chew. When Michael Korvac comes to the present day, he gains immense power from Galactus' ship and comes to Earth with basically god status. Where he comes from is the confusing part because he claims to have fought the original Guardians of the Galaxy in the year 3000, which gets explained but seems very bizarre considering that's in the future, and there is indeed a present day Guardians of the Galaxy who actually end up fighting Korvac during this conflict. The Avengers then join them in the battle, and well, they all end up getting killed by the godlike villain Michael Korvac. But in a state of grief, Korvac decides to resurrect all the heroes and then kill himself, which is really unexpected and pretty weird. It's a bit of a mind trip, but ultimately ties up as a pretty epic storyline that actually stands the test of time in many ways. At number 9 is the Serpent Crown. This storyline is something that has kind of gone down as an iconic story, but at the time might have been seen as a big risk by writers and readers alike. Partly because it marks the first and last time a cowboy, named the Two-Gun Kid, was part of the Avengers, and partly because it pits the Avengers against the Squadron Sinister, which is basically Marvel's knockoff Justice League. While Kang the Conqueror is searching for the Serpent Crown, he sends the Avengers into an alternate dimension where they have to fight the likes of Hyperion, Nighthawk, Power Princess, Speed Demon, and Dr. Spectrum. Although these characters had already made an appearance by this time, this is one of their bigger features, and anyone would agree that a Justice League knockoff in the world of Marvel seems like a bad idea on paper. But quite to the contrary, a few of the members of Squadron Sinister end up sticking around, like Nighthawk and Hyperion, the latter of which later becomes a member of the Avengers himself. At number 8 is Shadowland. This storyline is one that has been criticized mainly due to the notion that it shows Daredevil doing some pretty bad stuff, which is unlike him. In this storyline, Daredevil basically goes on a power trip and decides that to take down the underground crime ring, The Hand, he has to actually join them. And not only join them, lead them. But after he's possessed by a demonic beast that The Hand worships, he becomes more evil than anticipated, opening a massive prison and tossing basically everyone in it. Basically, the story of Shadowland shows how other heroes are forced to confront Daredevil in his newfound villainy and attempt to bring him back to his senses. The Avengers take on this task and send in the likes of Luke Cage, Moon Knight, Ghost Rider, Spiderman, and Elektra, among others, to try and put a stop to his madness. And although it does seem like a bit of an oddly motivated plot, it has become somewhat iconic just because of the sheer mayhem that ensues when all of these notable forces clash.
In its 7th, Batmite. Batmite was a mischievous imp who appeared as a small childlike man donning an ill-fitting Batman costume with a black lightning bolt symbol. Hailing from another dimension, Batmite possessed nearly limitless magical powers. In his dimension, the resident imps idolized the heroes of Batman's world and would mimic their actions and adventures. Batman happened to be Batmite's favorite hero, obviously, leading to the imp visiting him on multiple occasions, often orchestrating peculiar events just to witness his hero in action. Despite his admiration though, Batmite was more of a bothersome pest than a supervillain, often realizing his actions had upset Batman and then leaving him alone. During his first visit to Earth, Batmite used his magical abilities to enhance Batman and Robin's crime-fighting efforts, albeit causing more trouble than assistance, but Batman eventually requested that Batmite apprehend the criminals himself. After fulfilling Batman's request, the imp complied and departed, vowing to return someday. Batmite did reappear later, this time causing chaos, not only for Batman and Robin, but also for the newly introduced Batwoman. So yeah, I mean, he's an imp, and imps are always shifty, okay? We know that. It's been a thing. In its 6th, Super Batman. When Dr. Wayne and Mrs. Wayne discover a baby named Kal-El in a mysterious spacecraft, they choose to raise him as their own child. They give him the name Bruce and instill him with a deep respect for all individuals regardless of social class or race. Mrs. Wayne, with her nurturing love, cultivates his heart, while Thomas Wayne, though emotionally reserved, proves to be a kind and compassionate father. Recognizing Kal-El's incredible abilities, his speed, agility, and unbreakable bones, Dr. Wayne focuses on pushing Bruce's mental limits rather than his physical ones, since, that's not really an issue. He imparts Bruce with the belief that cowards and bullies resort to violence, but Bruce, as someone exceptional, should aspire to be something higher, something better. Following the tragedy of his parents' death, Bruce withdraws from the world, finding solace in his parents' mansion. Consumed by a profound hatred for violence and death, the haunting images of death torment his sanity. However, one fateful day, a group of robbers invade his home. Bruce, unleashing his powers, brutally attacks them, tearing them apart with his heat vision. It is in this moment that Bruce realizes the potential of his abilities and resolves to utilize his powers for a greater purpose and adopts the identity of Batman, a symbol of justice and protection. So basically, it's if Superman was Bruce Wayne, which is dope as hell. It's from Superman Speeding Bullets, in case you were wondering. Check it out, it's actually really cool. Halfway through into number 5, John Paul Valley. John Paul Valley, also known as Azrael, was a vigilante who once operated in Gotham City. During a short period, he temporarily assumed the mantle of Batman after the original Dark Knight was incapacitated by Bane. However, his time as Batman was marred by a descent into insanity, leading to dire consequences. As Batman, John Paul succumbed to the darkness within himself, unleashing a brutal and merciless brand of justice justice upon minor criminals. He inflicted permanent damage to his adversaries, leaving them crippled and beyond recovery, and one such instance was when he ruthlessly assaulted the Tallyman, mistaking him for the original Batman and retaliating for an attempted assassination. In his tumultuous tenure as Batman, John Paul also thwarted the Trigger Twins during a train heist and confronted Mr. Freeze at the Gotham morgue. These confrontations further showcased his unpredictable and aggressive nature as he struggled to maintain control over his actions. Ultimately, John Paul's time as Batman came to an end as he was forcibly removed from the role, but he returned to his original identity as Azrael. His tenure as Dark Knight serves as a cautionary tale, but also he went insane and started seeing Batmite, but not the real Batmite. It's a whole other thing. It's weird. Man, it's weird. And at 4, Vampire Batman. As Batman investigates a series of gruesome deaths in Gotham City, only to discover that the killer is none other than Dracula, the legendary vampire. Not even a joke, actually a thing. Batman teams up with a rogue vampire named Tanya to stop Dracula and his brood from terrorizing the city, but to do so, Tanya provides Batman with a blood substitute after turning him into a vampire to spare him from the cycle of death and killing that comes with being bitten, because you have to drink blood in order to keep living, so they give him a blood substitute to kind of stop that so he has it inside himself. And in order to destroy Dracula's minions, Batman lures them into the Batcave where Tanya and his followers engage them in combat. Batman detonates multiple explosives in the cave, destroying the Wayne Manor and exposing the cave to sunlight, which ultimately kills all the vampires within it. Batman then confronts Dracula on his own and impales the vampire lord on a tree that has been struck by lightning, because this is supernatural and you need something more than just chopping their heads off. This act, however, comes at the cost of Batman's humanity as Dracula drains the last of his blood. Nevertheless, Batman assured his friend Alfred that he had nothing to fear, because as Batman with new vampiric powers, he will live on forever. But I'm pretty sure that this doesn't go well, and I'm pretty sure he tries to take over the world. Don't quote me on that, but if you want to know for yourself, check out Batman and Dracula Red Reign. Getting close to the end, in at number 3, Elliot Ness. Elliot Ness, a dedicated federal agent, was entrusted with the formidable task of dismantling the criminal empire of Al Capone during the era of Prohibition in Chicago. And this is also a real thing. This actually happened. But in this story, he was leading a team comprising of Danny Rasher, Frank Basil, and George Kochen. They became renowned as the Untouchables, earning the moniker bestowed upon them by the press. Despite their unwavering determination, they found themselves constantly constrained by legal limitations in their pursuit of justice. Driven by an unyielding desire to rid the city of crime, though, Ness eventually adopted a clandestine alter ego and transformed into the Batman. Operating under the cover of darkness, his vigilante persona straddled the fine line between law enforcement and vigilantism. This dual role allowed him to operate outside of the confines of the law, using unconventional means to bring down the criminals who eluded traditional justice. But since he was actually a federal agent, he was able to, do things enough so that they couldn't just say, hey, he's a vigilante, this doesn't count. Elliot Ness, the federal agent turned into a masked crusader, undertook the mantle of Batman to confront the criminal underworld both within and outside the boundaries of the law, embodying a symbol of unwavering justice, but who also hunts Kronos with Dean Winchester on the weekends.
Number 2, Miles Morales, animated Spider-Verse trilogy. The Miles Morales of Into the Spider-Verse has a somewhat different origin story, as we learn in the latest film in the trilogy, Across the Spider-Verse. Mild, I would say pretty mild, spoilers ahead for those who have yet to see the film, as that's the Miles we are going to be focusing on here. So we're not focusing on comic book 1610, we're going to be focusing on animated universe Miles from Earth 1610. The one from Sony's animated multiverse, if you will. But at the same time, I'm going to try and keep this more general and avoid getting too specific, so hopefully this will be quite a mild spoiler if you want to listen that won't ruin the movie for you at all. At least that's what I'm hoping. Hope I'm not ruining the movie for anyone. That would make me sad. And Across the Spider-Verse, we learn that Miles' origin is actually unique in the sense that it connects him to another reality. This is interesting and unique for his origin story and makes him more of a standout or odd, weird, you might say, character when it comes to the fact that technically he could be considered the Spider-Man of a different reality than his native one of Earth 1610. I found that very interesting, and I think it makes him kind of weird in a great way. in an intriguing way. Number 1. Bagman. If you thought Bagman was weird, wait till I tell you about Bagman. Yep, you heard that right. You remember Spider-Man? If you aren't familiar with her, a quick recap for you. She is an alternate reality spider-themed hero where instead of Peter Parker ending up with spider-like powers and abilities after being bitten by a radioactive spider, May Parker, his aunt, receives them instead after she was bitten while delivering a forgotten lunch to Peter while he was on a field trip at school. In this reality, May Parker is the hero known as Spider-Man, with Peter and Ben being part of her crime-fighting team and offering her support in terms of tech know-how and heart. Bagman appears as one of the alternates in the 2019 Spider-Verse comic in issue number 2 that Spider-Man reached out to get help from, reaching across the multiverse in order to defeat an evil alternate version of herself who was actually Carnage, an alternate Carnage, and an alternate May Parker.
And it's Bat Baby. In Batman number 147, published in 1962, we are introduced to Bat Baby, offering a glimpse into the distinctiveness of Batman during the Silver Age of comics. Contrasting the modern portrayal of Batman as a brooding and conflicted loner, this story reveals a peculiar side of the Caped Crusader. The narrative unfolds as Batman and Robin infiltrate a criminal hideout, initially gaining the upper hand. However, the criminals manage to escape when their mad scientist deploys a de-aging ray on Batman, basically think sky-high pacifier, regressing him into a 4-year-old child. Remarkably though, Batman retains his adult intellect and physical strength. Rather than being dismayed by this transformation, Bruce embraces it, donning a miniaturized cape, cowl, and Batman-themed overalls to become Bat Baby. The criminals attempted to ridicule him, but Bat Baby uses his enhanced abilities to foil their plans. So yeah, it is worth noting that de-aging superheroes was a curious trend in this era as well, with characters like Superboy and Wonder Girl being popular variations of Superman and Wonder Woman. However, this takes that to a literal extreme. The concept of a baby Bruce Wayne fighting crime did not have lasting popularity, and Bat Baby remains a singular appearance in DC Comics, which was in Batman number 147. But I think we can all kind of appreciate that. In at 9, Satan Batman. In this future incarnation, Damian Wayne assumes the role of Batman following the demise of the second Batman. Possessing supernatural abilities and the willingness to take lives, Damian believed that resorting to lethal methods was necessary to combat crime, setting him apart from any other members of the Bat family. Despite the efforts of Father James Gordon and Alfred to guide him towards a different path, Damian remained steadfast in his convictions. A heated argument with his father resulted in Damian severely injuring him with a dangerously close stab wound, leading to his expulsion from the Batcave by Alfred. During his tenure as Batman, Damian faced a formidable adversary in the form of Michael Lane, the former Azrael, driven by an unhinged obsession to destroy Batman under the influence of Simon Hurt. As chaos engulfed the planet, Gotham became a quarantine city overrun by Joker-affected inhabitants, and Talia al Ghul, Damian's mother, ordered the city's annihilation through a nuclear strike authorized by Simon Hurt, who had risen to the highest echelons of the American government. Remarkably, Damian survived the cataclysmic blast due to a pact he had made with Dr. Hurt, so I don't know what Simon was thinking, really, okay? He didn't think that one through. In at 8, Dark Claw. Logan Wayne is a combination of Bruce Wayne and Logan, being first introduced in Marvel vs. DC number 3. At 5 years old, after witnessing his parents' death at the hands of an armed robber, Logan Wayne was sent to live with his uncle in Alberta, Canada. All hail the North! His uncle was a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, basically the Canadian FBI, and was ambushed and killed by poachers a short time after Logan's arrival in Canada. After the death of his uncle, Logan was sent to live in a home run by nuns, and as soon as he was old enough, he enlisted in the Royal Canadian Air Force. Logan was submitted to the Weapon X project, after that, the Canadian Super Soldier program, and it was here that Logan had adamantium bonded to his bones and learned of his meta-mutant nature. And since this is an amalgam, they are both considered metas and mutants because that's basically the same thing between the universes. The Weapon X project was terminated due to its dual failure. Logan was ineffective because he actually had a conscience, but this didn't stop him from being pretty damn bad. Having all the powers of Logan, as well as things like the Clawcopter and Clawmobile, and I'm not even kidding, this is in essence a superpowered Batman, which I think we all should know is pretty dope. Although I wonder if he has a Claw credit card.
Number 7. Superior Spider-Man. What if one of Spider-Man's greatest foes became Spider-Man himself? Well, we know what happens because this actually has happened. Actually a few times in the comics. Now, one of the most memorable and strangest occurrences of this was when Spider-Man actually traded bodies with Dr. Octopus. You know, I've short formed that name so much in recent years that it actually feels weird to say his whole supervillain title name now, Dr. Octopus. Why does that feel so weird? Otto at the time was on his deathbed, and in an attempt to save his mind and preserve it, managed to trick Peter into swapping bodies with him. Initially, Doc Ock just wanted to use Peter's younger body to save himself, and actually had no interest in taking Peter's place. However, as Peter in Otto's body lay on now his deathbed, because they'd swapped bodies and he was in Otto's failing body, he managed to convince Otto that the world needed Spider-Man, and to take up the mantle and continue what Peter had started when he became Spider-Man years ago. Otto surprised us all by actually agreeing, vowing to act as a hero, and to even do better than Peter had, dubbing himself Superior Spider-Man, which honestly, that last part, not so surprising for Otto Octavius. Although ultimately, Otto wouldn't necessarily do better, he wouldn't necessarily be a better Spider-Man. Some very interesting things came out of this massive storyline, and there are still some people that argue that Superior Spider-Man is better, so I mean, I guess that's for you, the reader, to decide. Number 6. Spider-Boy. What happens when you take Connor Kent's Superboy and mix him with Peter Parker's Spider-Man? You get Spider-Boy. Spider-Boy is one of those rare and amazing creations that came out of the days of Amalgam Comics. For those who are unfamiliar with Amalgam Comics, it was a magical joint comic line that existed between both DC Comics and Marvel Comics. These two publishers came together to combine their worlds, mashing up heroes and stories to give us new characters who were inspired by their roster of superheroes and supervillains from each of their unique multiverses. Spider-Boy, as such, is one of those characters. Spider-Boy was a clone who was created by Project Cadmus to be a duplicate of the Amalgam Universe's Super Soldier, but with the added ability to manipulate gravity. Peter Parker was the scientist who was in charge of creating this clone, but he died during the process after his project was basically sabotaged. As a result, the clone created was much younger than intended. He was named Pete after his creator by General Thaddeus Ross, who was overseeing this project. Unfortunately, Ross, who Pete came to know as his Uncle Jen, was killed by a mugger. As a result, Pete lamented his young age as this had made the mugger dismiss him and focus on Ross. Spider-Boy vowed from that day on to become undismissible, so all criminals would focus on him instead of innocent bystanders. Number 5. Spider-Man. Another one of my favorite alternate spider weirdos is Spider-Man. I love Spider-Man. Spider-Man spun out of a what-if story, which aimed to answer the question, what if Aunt May had been bitten by a radioactive spider? The question we were all, I'm sure, itching to know the answer to at the time. This first happened to May in issue number 23 of the 1977 What If series. May was basically bringing Peter his lunch, which he had forgotten at home, when she was the one who ended up being bitten by the radioactive spider in his place. In May's reality, both Peter and Ben are still alive and well and actually act as her allies, while she fights to protect New York and stop criminals in their tracks. Kinda like a cute little family team. I love it. Number 4. Japanese Spider-Man, or Spider-Man, as he is also sometimes known. Japanese Spider-Man is very different from the one we know in North America. In Japan, Spider-Man actually had his own TV show, but with that he also got a radically different backstory. It's really wild and really great. If you think you know Spider-Man, you likely will be very surprised by this version of Spider-Man. Spider-Man here is Takayuya Yamashiro, who got his spider-like abilities from a dying alien. Along with these abilities, he was also given Leopardon, a giant robot mech spaceship. Yep. The alien who gave him his abilities is named Garia, and actually hails from another world known as Planet Spider. Prior to becoming the hero Spider-Man, and even after, Yamashiro was known for being a talented motocross racer. Also, the intro for the 1970 show is still one of my all-time favorite intros I've ever probably heard in the existence of television intros, and I honestly still think it slaps today. Number 3. Spider-Ham. This version of Spider-Man is actually a web-slinging cartoon pig. Spider-Ham hails from a reality that is similar to the Toontown we see in the classic film Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Physics aren't really the same as our world, but instead are reimagined to be kinda wacky like how they are in classic cartoons. I don't know about you, but to me, this has always made Spider-Ham not only seem like one of the weirdest variants around, but also kind of one of the most powerful just because of that. Because I feel like if you have toon physics, like, watch out. Spider-Ham Spider-Ham's civilian name is Peter Porker, and he hails from the reality designated number 8311. In Spider-Ham's origin story, he actually started out as a spider, but after being bitten by a radioactive sort of rage-fueled pig named May Porker, who actually was a scientist simply trying to try out an atomic-powered hairdryer at the time, which went awry and kind of put her into a fit of rage, he was transformed into a pig. This is the true story. Despite being turned into a pig, he still kept all of his spider-like abilities and powers, hence Spider-Ham. Number 2, Widow, aka Spider-Horse. Although if you look up Spider-Horse on Google, you might actually get a different character before you get Widow. But editorial speaking, Spider-Horse is still a name that is used with this character, so I'm still mentioning it here because I still think it's relevant, and I like saying Spider-Horse. Remember when I was telling you about web-slinger Patrick O'Hara living in the Wild Wild West times? Well, he's not the only one who receives spider-like abilities. No, no, no. His horse was also bitten by the same elixir-doused radioactive spider. And guess what? He got powers too. Widow is Patrick O'Hara's loyal steed, who also became a spider-like hero and even was recruited alongside Webslinger to join the Web Warriors and fight against the Inheritors during the Spider-Verse event. Spider-Horse is also one of the Spider-Man variants we see or will see in Across the Spider-Verse. Fun facts. At least it seems like we'll see him. He's in the trailer, so I feel like he's gonna be in there. Number 1, Spidey Super Stories. I love this one. The Electric Company actually brought us the first ever live action depiction of Spider-Man, if you can believe that, with their Spidey Super Stories skits. In these skits, Spider-Man was portrayed by puppeteer and dancer Danny Seagren. This version of Spider-Man never spoke, but instead acted out his intentions that were communicated by a narrator who told the story. Fun fact, Morgan Freeman was actually one of the actors who had narrating credits for these skits, so if you go back and listen to some of them, you might hear his very familiar voice. He was a member of the Electric Company cast, so that's why you will hear that. In these stories, Spider-Man took on villains like Dr. Fly and Spoiler. Spoiler was all about ruining things for folks, hence his name, Spoiler. He likes to spoil things. Dr. Fly, on the other hand, was a half-human, half-mutant who wanted to transform everyone on the planet into a mutant like he was. All of these villains were so strange and so great, and you should go back and watch some of these skits because they're pretty fantastic.
Coming in at number 10 today is the Hulk. Now just hold on a sec before you get up in arms. Everyone knows the Hulk's ability to turn into a big old green monster and rip things apart with a strength that increases based on his anger. But what many of you may not know is that Hulk actually possesses a much more subtle ability to see astral projections and ghosts and even interact with them if he chooses to. Hulk's astral form perception has come in handy when working with Doctor Strange as a defender, but why does Hulk even have this ability in the first place? Well, Bruce Banner subconsciously feared his father's ghost would come back to haunt him, like literally come back to haunt him. And so, the Hulk just developed this mechanism to allow him to look out for that ghost. There isn't really more to it, that's just kind of it. Hulk just developed the ability that is something usually reserved for telepaths and magic users. For the super intelligent Bruce Banner, it would make a bit more sense, but it's actually been suggested that for Bruce, the clarity of the astral forms are diminished when compared to the telepathically resistant Hulk's ability to view them. With Immortal Hulk and the connection to the One Below All, perhaps that could serve as some kind of fan explanation, but that's all we got. Number 9, Dupe. This bumpy looking lima bean is and was basically the mascot of a bunch of different mutant teams in Marvel Comics, while also low-key being one of the heaviest hitters around. Dupe is unable to learn English, and as such he speaks in a language all of his own that everyone can somehow understand. According to Captain America, the US government created him in a secret weapons project and he was instrumental in the fall of the Soviet Union. But then, apparently, he also comes from a place called Marginalia, quote, the world between worlds and place that begins where the story ends. Which is basically to say that we don't actually know where he comes from for sure. The most surprising thing about Dupe though is his list of powers. It is long. He has possible omniscience, he's strong and durable enough to defeat Thor, he can heal from super serious wounds in seconds and resurrect himself, he has blinding speed, size alteration, energy projection, psionic fire, blasts and shields, he can perform quote, Dupish magic and has the power of the Funk. Oh, and Dupe's body also contains a nightmare dimension known as Dupeland, and he is able to access that by turning himself inside out. It's not just Dupe's powers that are weird, it's literally the whole package. He's weird. Number 8. Hindsight Lad. To be completely candid here, Hindsight Lad's powers are not actual powers, but he acts like they are, and that means I'm going to talk about it. Carton Lafroige was a nuisance before he ever became Hindsight Lad, but when he found out that his neighbor, Robbie Baldwin, was Speedball of the New Warriors, he threatened to reveal Robbie's secret identity unless Robbie let him be a part of the team. And he actually managed to prove very useful, and did have some tactical ability which eventually got him fully put on the team. He kind of became their guy in the chair, but that's because his self-given power was the power of hindsight. The power to look back at all the superhero fights that he's been a part of and analyze them, quote unquote, and now with the present hindsight, he can tell the heroes what they should have tried differently, which in his mind meant they can now go prepare for that exact same scenario if it plays out again, which in a comic book, that's probably not gonna happen. Just saying.
And at 7, the Cloud. After joining the Defenders, Cloud struggled with understanding their true origins. Complicating matters, they developed feelings for their teammate Moondragon, who was subtly using telepathic signals to manipulate others. Cloud's confusion led them to shapeshift into Danny Milligan's form, hoping to be a more suitable form for Moondragon, but this adds to the mystery surrounding Cloud's identity and just life in general, because they are a freaking cloud that will shapeshift into naked humans. In time, Cloud regained their complete memories and led the Defenders on a space mission to prevent the Star Thief from harming their family, and with their memories restored, Cloud embraced their rightful place in the cosmos, finding clarity and purpose once again. Most recently, now preferring the pronoun they, Cloud reappeared as a member of Doctor Strange's new Defenders. While the Defenders were in the 4th cosmos, Cloud stayed behind and journeyed into the mystery. Cloud then encountered a new version of the Defenders as they were traveling through the mystery, specifically the land of couldn't be, shouldn't be. And at 6, the Creeper. Jack Ryder, a former resident of Gotham City, finds himself fired from his political talk show when he fearlessly criticized his sponsors and refused to back down. Recognizing his detective skills, Chief of Network Security Bill Brain offered Ryder a job as an investigator. Ryder's first assignment involved locating Dr. Yatz, a scientist captured by a local gangster, Angel Devlin, who is collaborating with communist powers. To infiltrate Devlin's masquerade party, Ryder seeks a disguise at a costume shop where he improvises a unique outfit with yellow lights, green trunks, red gloves and boots, with yellow makeup, a green wig. It's really weird. He even has like a sheepskin rug as a cape. Ryder completes his bold ensemble, and then at the party he confronts Devlin's henchmen and rescues Dr. Yatz, but not without being injured. In a twisted turn of fate though, Dr. Yatz injects Ryder with a chemical serum that enhances his healing, strength, and stamina, but also implants a tiny device under his skin capable of rearranging molecular structures and rendering his suit basically invisible until needed. But the comic explanation is that he can switch between his skin and his costume that he wore to the party at will, which is all kinds of strange. Halfway through into number 5, Ultra Boy. Jonah, known as Ultra Boy and hailing from the planet of Rimbor, is a member of the Legion of Superheroes with a wide array of powers, but he can only use one of them at a time due to his physical limitations. Originally, Joe was part of a gang called the Emerald Dragons on the seedy world of Rimbor. While traveling in his space speedster, not that kind of speedster, he was swallowed by an energy blast, a monstrous whale-like creature that devoured any life form in its path. Luckily, the Galactic Patrol cruiser saved him by cutting open the creature with a ray, but the radiation charged Joe's body, granting him incredible abilities like X-ray vision and more. Embracing his newfound powers, he became Ultra Boy and joined law enforcement efforts, leading him to be recommended for the Legion of Superheroes. At some point, Joe was thrown back in time to the 20th century and teamed up with Superboy, merging their minds to become Reflecto, but eventually he returned to the 30th century and continued his adventures as Ultra Boy. And at 4, Ghost Rider. Johnny Blaze's parents were famous motorcycle stars alongside Craig Crash Simpson, who became like a father figure to Johnny after their death. Taught by Crash, Johnny was expected to carry on the legacy, but he resisted, disappointing his girlfriend Roxanne. When Crash fell terminally ill, Johnny delved into the occult in desperation to save him. He unwillingly summoned Mephisto, whom he struck a deal with to cure Crash's cancer in exchange for his eternal servitude in hell. Despite the deal though, Crash died shortly after, attempting a dangerous stunt. Grieving and seeking to honor his foster father, Johnny attempted the same stunt, but nearly lost his soul to Mephisto, and Yeah, then he becomes Ghost Rider. Getting close to the end, in number 3, Fat Man the Human Flying Saucer. Van Crawford, a wealthy owner of hobby shops and a hobby expert, stumbled upon a crashed flying saucer one day. To show gratitude for his assistance, the shape-shifting alien inside granted Van a drink that tasted like a chocolate milkshake, but was actually the substance used by the alien's race to transform into saucers. Now, possessing that same power, Van adopted the persona of Fat Man and fought evil with his newfound abilities. Along the way, he gained a teenage sidekick of Tin Man, who could coat himself in tin because of magic, and Fat Man's adventures led him to become the temporary king of Octagonia, a title obtained by spending $25,000, oblivious to the actual nature of the acquisition. If you're gonna be called Fat Man the Human Flying Saucer and your only power is to turn into a flying saucer and you're other than that just rich? Weird. But ultimately, in at number 2, Doorman. Dermar Davis, an ordinary American youth, experienced a personal tragedy when his mother passed away during his college years. After completing his education, Dermar responded to Dr. Immortal's call for costumed adventurers to form a team, leading him to join the Great Lakes Avengers. As a mutant with a remarkable teleportation ability, he became an invaluable asset to the team, providing them with stealthy entrances and surprising attacks by creating openings into almost any structure. And the reason that this is weird is because, like, yeah, sure, he's a mutant, but a mutant that can become a door? That's weird even by mutant standards. There's a dude covered in eyeballs, for God's sakes. Doorman is a class 10 teleporter, okay, and if you're confused as to what that means, his body is a portal to the Dark Force dimension, allowing for people or items to pass through him and walk through any solid object that the Doorman is standing against. When creating a door through an object, Doorman is often surrounded by floating black spheres that create an outline of his body and like on the opposite side of any object, so they kind of know where they're coming through. But becoming a mutant that turns into doors? Yeah. And finally, in at number 1, Hindsight Lad. Initially met with skepticism by the other new warriors, Hindsight Lad proved his value when he rescued the team from the clutches of the Poison Memories. Utilizing Speedball's address book, he teamed up with the Night Thrasher to mount a successful rescue mission wherein the core members were captured and sent through time by the Sphinx. With the original New Warriors missing, Hindsight Lad and Bandit formed a new team of heroes called the New Warriors. Carlton LaForge, a computer nerd and misfit, discovered his neighbor Robbie Baldwin's secret identity as Speedball during an apartment crisis caused by Darkling's Dark Force. Carlton, a superhero enthusiast with no powers, demanded to join the team or he would expose Robbie. Reluctantly, Speedball and the New Warriors agreed, and Carlton officially became Hindsight Lad, who has no powers except the power of hindsight, being able to look back and say what they could have done differently.
Number 10, Baby Inheritors. We've gone into the Spider-Verse multiple times in the comics now, and we are about to go back again. Supposedly one last time. We'll see what happens. But I'm sure nothing can top the weirdness of how the last Spider-Man multiversal crossover ended. In the first Spider-Verse in the comics, the Inheritors were the group of villains that the Spider Totems of the multiverse had to band together to fight. At the end of that event, they defeated them, but then oddly enough, they returned again via Superior Spider-Man, aka Otto Octavius' tech. The Inheritors managed to clone themselves and make a comeback in Spider-Geddon, once more uniting the Spider Army to come together and defeat their threat to the multiverse. The Inheritors are basically energy vampires who specifically prey on animal or insect-inspired totemic beings, like Spider Totems. Spider Totems are basically people across the multiverse with spider-like powers and abilities who were destined to become spider-themed heroes and protect their world. At the end of Spider-Geddon, the Inheritors are defeated by being turned into baby versions of themselves and given to Spider-Man, Aunt May of Earth 3123, to raise to be good. Because that's how you defeat villains sometimes. Sometimes you just gotta raise them yourself. Number 9, Feed Me Plasma. One of the weirdest things, especially here on the internet, is everyone's obsession with Morbius feeding on plasma and not human blood. I mean, the amount of times I've talked about Morbius drinking blood and people on the internet have been like, actually it's plasma. It's an insane amount. People really love the plasma. This doesn't actually come from the comics though, but instead is something that grew out of the Spider-Man animated series. And it came to be thanks to censorship, of course, like with so many weird things that we have, because isn't that just always the way? Morbius, being a vampire on basically a children's animated series, wasn't allowed to be shown feeding on blood because it was considered too violent. So instead they had Morbius thirst for plasma. That way you can get around the whole blood thing, although plasma of course it's in blood. Plasma is the liquid portion of your blood that contains mainly water as opposed to the other portions of your blood, which is primarily made up of red and white blood cells as well as platelets. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list here and you are loving what we do on the channel, please head on over to Facebook. You can follow us there, and we have more exciting content coming your way and some exclusive things planned for you in the future, we hope. Number 8. Fin Fang Foom's diaper. Speaking of censorship, I have another strange one for you. This one comes from the comics, and we have the Comics Code Authority to thank for it, of course. Thanks, CCA. Thank you so much. Fin Fang Foom is a dragon that is well known in the comics. Recently in the MCU, we actually thought Fin Fang Foom might appear in Shang-Chi based on merch, only to learn that the dragon there was actually instead known as the Great Protector, so that was not Fin Fang Foom. In the comics, I recently saw Fin Fang Foom in the pages of Marauders, where he pops up before the original team dissolved, with Iceman actually fighting Foom before deciding to take a vacation from his work on the team, eventually leaving the Marauders completely once they rebooted that series. Well, I mean, at least he's gone for now. Bobby might be back later, but for now, he's out. Fin Fang Foom has years of history, and a good chunk of those years he spent in a purple diaper. Why? Because the CCA was worried about the dragon's indecent exposure. I'm not joking here, guys. That's what they were like. They're like, he's gotta wear pants. He's out there, he's naked. And it is for the reason of dragon modesty that he was forced to wear his iconic purple diaper or boxers or shorts, depending on, of course, who's drawing him and, you know, how you, as the person reading and looking at the comic, want to interpret that garment that he was forced into wearing. Number 7. Spider Bite. I am so happy that I get to talk about Spider Bite. She was actually my favorite spider-themed hero to appear in the Vault of Spiders comic, and she is also definitely a weirdo in the best of ways. She hails from a world where people actually spend most of their time online as avatars, which is pretty weird. Spider Bite is actually Margot's avatar, or one of them, rather, that she wears in the digital space. She fights to protect people in cyberspace by donning her Spider Bite persona and apprehending cyber criminals. Seriously though, how cool would it be if we actually had a hero like this on, you know, the internet, on cyberspace? Although this might seem like a strange reality to some, the cool thing about Spider Bite is it kind of feels like she could exist in our own future. I mean, already people spend a lot of time online, and we have things like VR, Oculus, and even digital land. So this could very well be our own future. Honestly, we maybe need some vigilantes on the internet. Number 6. Doppelganger. Doppelganger is known for being one of the most vicious and evil spider people out there. He was actually created initially during the Infinity War event by the evil version of Adam Warlock, known as Magus. During that event, many different heroes had to fight against their evil alternate selves, or fight against the evil alternate versions of fellow heroes and friends. Doppelganger was one of these, but despite being killed during Infinity War, he still managed to reappear again in the comics, returning in Maximum Carnage and wreaking havoc every time he manages to pretty much pop up, which happens actually surprisingly often when you consider how many times in different ways he's actually died over the years, but he's still kicking. Number 5. Ghost Spider. I feel like some people are going to be offended by some of the spider folks I'm calling weird on this list, but I would like to take this time to remind you that weird doesn't have to be a bad thing. In fact, weird to me usually tends to be a good thing. Usually, weird to me just means something that is extreme or unique in some way, something that stands out. And standing out, honestly, it can be quite a good thing. In fact, in Spider-Gwen or Ghost Spider's case, I feel like her being weird is a big part of the reason why I love her character, and why I think a lot of us love her character. In almost every other universe, Gwen Stacy tragically dies, and is actually a huge part of a staple canon event for most Peter Parkers or Spider-Men out there. But in her home reality of Earth 65, things were different. Instead of her dying, it's Peter who becomes the Lizard, and he dies. And this is surprisingly rare. There are very few realities where Gwen even gets to stay alive. Primarily, I can only think of House of M and Gwenpool's home reality off the top of my head. So in the sense of standing out, Ghost Spider truly is a lovable weirdo, as the girl that not only lived, but herself also becomes a spider-themed hero. Pretty cool. Number 4. Patton Parnell. Patton Parnell is one of my favorite alternate versions of Spider-Man. If you thought Spider-Man was creepy, wait till you meet this guy. Patton Parnell is the Spider-Man of Earth 51412. In this reality, Patton stands in for Peter, but instead of being a good guy, he's kinda just a creepy guy who enjoys making ants burn on the sidewalk with a magnifying glass as part of his experiments. However, Patton is likely a sadistic and creepy person because he actually has a pretty rough home life, often being mistreated by his Uncle Ted. In the end, when he receives his powers, they turn him into a monstrous, more evil spider-like creature, who ends up mutating into something more monster than man. This version of Spider-Man has only ever made his first and last appearance in Edge of of Spider-Verse issue number 4 from 2014. Though honestly, I would love to see more versions of Patton popping up around the world. He's pretty cool. Number 3, Bagman. Bagman is an interesting character. Although many of us consider him to be an alternate thanks to the costume's appearance in events like the Spider-Verse and properties like Marvel's Spider-Man, where this is one of the costumes you can roam around the city in the comics, this was only really a moment in Peter's life, at least in the main continuity of Earth 616. Bagman's origins come from the time when Peter went to Reed Richards for help with his black costume, which it turned out was actually the symbiote Venom, and after being separated from the Venom symbiote, used this outfit as a temporary replacement costume. It was made up of a fantastic suit loaned to him from Johnny Storm's The Human Torch and a paper bag, which had 2 holes cut out for eyes that he would wear over his head. Bagman's appearance throughout Spider-Verse content, however, implies that somewhere out there exists a world where Spider-Man never stopped wearing the Bagman outfit. Although, we've never visited that world, but I would love to. At least I don't think we have.
But ultimately, in at number 2, Zur-En-Arrh. The enigmatic phrase Zur-En-Arrh began appearing throughout the streets and dark alleys of Gotham City, often accompanying Batman's encounters with criminals like the Joker. As time passed, the phrase continued to manifest, typically as graffiti in the background, until one fateful encounter with the Black Glove, who shattered Batman's mind. Various leader Simon Hurt exploited a deep-seated psychological trauma within Batman, triggering a mental breakdown. In the wake of this devastating event, it was unveiled that Batman had constructed a backup personality dormant within his subconscious for years, awaiting the activation code Zur-En-Arrh. This alternate persona transformed Bruce into a deranged Batman that called himself Zur-En-Arrh, which is a twisted reflection of his former self. Empowered by the persona of Zur-En-Arrh, Batman confronted the Black Glove at Arkham Asylum, where they sought to wager his life in a treacherous gambling game. He also faced off against the Joker, but despite his valiant efforts, he ultimately succumbed to defeat, entombed alive within the asylum's graveyard. That's so messed up. That's insane, dude. God. And finally, in at number 1, Lovecraft Batman. After witnessing the brutal death of his parents during childhood, Bruce Wayne embarked on a relentless quest spanning 2 decades to unravel the mysteries of criminal behavior. However, everything takes a dramatic turn when he, along with his trusted companions, venture to the Antarctic in search of an expedition team led by the eccentric socialite Oswald Cobblepot. What awaits Bruce in this frozen realm, though, is a peculiar sight. Cobblepot wandering alone in the icy wilderness, while one of his crewmen, Grendon, had transformed into a lifeless yet animated corpse, unearthing a creature trapped within the frozen depths. Driven by the sense of duty, Bruce seized the opportunity to bring Grendon and the unearthed creature back to Gotham under his custody. However, as the backdrop of the crime-ridden Roaring Twenties sets the stage, Bruce becomes entangled in a web of connections that link Gotham's dark past to his own father, his parents' death, and a slain scientist named Kirk Longstrom, who possesses the ability to communicate with bats. Through his investigations, Bruce discovers that he alone possesses the power to thwart the sinister cult of Ghoul, who seek to bring out the demise of Gotham and the world itself. Basically, this is Lovecraft Batman, okay? Think Cthulhu but Batman, and that's what you get.